first item on our agenda is recognition of those who excel teacher award, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Burdette.
Is Michael Steffen in the audience?
Steven, yeah.
Stephen, I thought somebody told me to say it the other way. Well, come on down. The Illinois State Board of Education annually sponsors those who excel to honor individuals who have made a significant contribution to our state's public and non-public elementary and secondary schools. Excellence, meritorious service, and special recognition awards are presented in 7 categories: classroom teacher, school administrator, principal, student support personnel, educational service personnel, school board member, community volunteer, and early career education. Nomination materials are evaluated by a selection committee comprised of individuals who represent a variety of educational organizations. It is our honor to have our own Michael Steven represent Oak Park and River Park's High School District 200, yay, as those who excel teacher award recipient. Congratulations.
Okay, and next we have our introductory reports.
Ms. Hamilton, would you give us the FOIA report?
Yes, there were 4 FOIAs and all 4 are resolved.
Okay, would our student rep, Mr. Chu, come forward?
Substitute, yeah.
We have a substitute. Would you
Yeah.
tell us your name?
Hi, I'm Lawrence Landfair. I am the senior class representative for Student Council, and I'm filming for Institute. So far, our Student Council has been working on some charity ideas that we have, volunteering at retirement homes or doing something with the food pantry. We are talking right now to other recipients for the Tradition of Excellence. Already have questions for them that we're going to ask them, and we should be wrapping up with that soon. Some student concerns are with the 12-day absences policy, whether it be people with religious holidays or those who have been hospitalized. We're not entirely sure about the policy and would like to, as a student body, know and understand that more. We've also planned to talk with the head of the food service to possibly talk about having a salad and fruit bar available for students, as that's been requested. Another issue we've been looking at would be with scanners. One instance for the going outside for lunch. Students are saying scanners are a little slow and it's hard to actually go to lunch and then come back in time for school. And the second is when it comes to going to class when we're late, whether it be a second or a minute, scanners often don't work, and we are sometimes, it's even have to meet 10 minutes late for a class, and we're concerned about that as well. Another issue, not really I guess an issue, but more of a request, would be with possibly being able to use our IDs to pay for color printing. We had been talking about that last year and thought that might have happened, but we haven't gotten an update, so we're not entirely sure. And then lastly, would be with the graduation. We had the town hall yesterday. I had attended it as well as a couple of students here. For me personally, I thought it was very good. I felt that we had a constructive dialogue, and Mr. Rouse, I thank him for actually explaining it so we weren't really left in the dark, because that's how we kind of felt originally. On behalf of the students, I'm saying that we would be open to many different ideas, but we don't want to be left out of the loop. We just want to be informed and also have a say in the matter, because this is in fact our graduation. So, yes.
Thank you. Congratulations to senior Rachel Hernandez for being named the class of 2019 National Hispanic Recognition Program Scholar. Also, congratulations goes to our 40 seniors who have been commended in the 2019 National Merit Scholarship Program. 60 of our African American juniors were selected to attend the recent Black Student Leadership Conference at the College of DuPage. The day included sessions on GPA, admissions, cultural awareness, and featured 2 panel discussions with current college students and admission counselors. Our Poetry Slam team, Shakespeare Slam team, will go to their regional bout on November the 3rd. Congratulations also goes out to our 48 music students who earned spots in the 2018 Illinois Music Education Association District 1 ensembles and will perform at the District 1 festival next month. English teacher Laura Young's fiction work, Daughter, was published in the Shoreline of Infinity, a science fiction quarterly magazine. We had 22 certified staff members just completed OPRF's annual Beyond Diversity workshop as a part of our ongoing racial equity professional development. And that concludes my announcements.
I wanted to I know that we have changed the structure of our agenda to have our announcements prior to public comments, as a way for our community to, and my selfish reason is to ensure that our community is able to hear our students report, because that is why we're all here. And so I just wanted, this will be our format moving forward. And we are at the point of public comment, and I know that we have a full audience, and just wanted to remind that this is not considered a dialogue with the board. And also just wanted to read from our policy, only because I'm a little tired and I don't want to stumble, about public participation and just the guidelines that our expectations from ourselves as well as you all, that public comment is seen as a time to make comment and not a dialogue with the board. Ordinarily, comments are limited to 3 minutes. In unusual circumstances and when an individual has made a request in advance, the individual may be allowed to speak for more than 3 minutes. And we're going to observe the board president's decision to shorten public comment to conserve time and give the maximum number of individuals an opportunity to speak, and observe the board president's decision to determine procedural matters regarding public participation not otherwise covered in board policy. And I don't need to talk about civility and respect because that is something that we've never had any issues with. I'm stating about the number of public comments for 2 reasons. One, we have a very full agenda this evening, and I know there are those here that want to hear the discussion and decisions that the board has placed before them this evening. And I also want to ensure that we are able to hear as many people as possible. So while we're not going to limit it to under 3 minutes, we have I think 28 people that are signed up. I will ask that if your comment has already been made, that perhaps this will be a time that we can move into the business meeting of the board. And also, if it is under 3 minutes, that's always okay too. And if there's a written statement, please give it to our clerk. And this evening, I'm going to ask that we allow our students to speak first, just because I know it's not a school night, but I would like for all of us to be able to hear their comments. And if that is, we can move that way, and I know they're not identified that way, so if the students that made public comment could just raise your hands, signed up for public comment. Okay. So come forward, someone, and then you all use your executive functioning skills to keep this moving.
Can we line them up?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure. Line up here.
Could you say your name, please?
Ryan Brennan. Oh.
Hi.
Hi. Hello and good evening. Should I
start the timer.
It starts.
Oh, okay. Hello and good evening, honorable board members of District 200. I'm Ryan Brennan, and though I am not a senior here at OPRF, this will be affecting my class. I am the class of 2021. This is a comprehensive and thoughtfully put together proposal that addresses the graduation attire change. And this addresses situations OPRF as a school fails to see. This is regarding situations such as various incomes and various families that attend OPRF, and also the conversation of gender expression and gender orientation as well. For a student to conform to the strict attire regulations that are currently in place is not only uncomfortable for the student, but puts them in a place of pressure to conform. Additionally, it will have this institution of OPRF look to be depicted as an impersonal institution that cares more about the tradition that is outdated, exclusive, and just very binary, to be blunt, instead of the students that are graduating themselves. This puts this tradition above the students and their wants and needs. Having a student leave OPRF feeling 100% represented and accepted is fulfilling for the school as a whole, and is something that, as a high school, OPRF owes to its students. The only way to graduate students with them feeling like the valued scholars that they are is the implementation of this proposal. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm a senior at OPRF. My name is Violet.
And I'm also a senior at OPRF. My name is Eleanor.
For 135 years, OPRF has had a unique, distinct, and beautiful graduation ceremony unlike any other school. We as a school pride ourselves on being unique and not conforming to the ideas and standards set by other schools. We pride ourselves in being individual here at OPRF, and switching to caps and gowns will strip us of those values that we have been taught since we became students here 4 years ago. Having such a distinct graduation ceremony is a testament to how unique we are as a school. We have already made several changes to the original tradition, like switching to a simple black, white, and navy color scheme in comparison to boys in black suits and girls in white dresses. These new changes allow for each student to not only feel included, but to also express themselves through their chosen attire. Students are now able to wear any formal wear they want as long as it fits the color scheme. Choosing caps and gowns will be an added expense for students and will only be amplified when we consider what will have to be worn underneath them as well. Typically, at regular graduations, formal wear or at least nice clothing is required to be worn under the gown. Therefore, not only are you paying for the $27 cap and gown, but you are also finding and potentially having to pay for something to go under it. While I completely understand that due to societal standards and pressure, the traditional attire still requires students to dress along a gendered binary, but that same decision is required when deciding what to wear under the gown. You will not be covered in that gown throughout the entirety of your graduation day. Whether you're getting ready at home or going out to dinner with your grandparents afterwards, you are still sadly being forced to make that choice. This is something that is not going to change whether you are wearing a cap and gown or not. This is the sad reality of life that students that don't conform to the gender binary face, whether it be at school, family functions, social outings, or no matter what the decision is here on their graduation day. With this being said, I think it is so important to recognize the values that we have been so lucky to receive from OPRF, such as the importance of our individuality and having confidence within ourselves. Wearing the traditional attire allows for everyone to express their creativity and individuality in the ways that the cap and gown would not permit.
I just wanted to talk about the venue. Our graduation has been held at our own high school in our beautiful historic stadium for 135 years. Moving graduation to UIC will take away a rich part of our history that OPRF is known for. I recognize that one of the main problems with the OPRF stadium location is the seating. However, instead of just moving into another place, why not strategically maximize the amount of space that we have? My sister graduated from OPRF just last year, so I can speak about the graduation setup and layout with confidence. First of all, every kid is given 5 tickets regardless of their family situation. My family just needs 3 tickets. Giving people only the tickets that they require might allow for other students' immediate families to go to their high school graduation at their own high school. Additionally, I noticed last year at my sister's graduation that there was a lot of unused space that I firmly believe can be reasonably filled. To the left of the graduates, there's about 300 seats for handicapped loved ones. However, to the right, where there's an equal amount of space, there's just 2 benches designated to the highest donors to the Booster Club. 300 seats worth of space is filled by just one family that was able to buy their way into a front row seat. This is clearly a waste of space a valuable space that could be reallocated towards larger immediate families. While UIC does take the space problem away, there are countless other reasons why UIC is not a viable option. First of all, while it might be cheaper for the district to have a graduation at UIC, it is not cheaper for the family. There is not only an $11 parking fee, but getting there is not as simple as getting to OPRF like we do at 8 every morning. While of course you could take the train, you probably don't want to do that in your graduation attire just minutes before you have to receive your high school diploma. Or obviously you can drive, but as we know, the Eisenhower traffic is very unpredictable, and that isn't the stress we and our families need to take on before the celebration of 4 years of hard work. In regards to transportation, I think we can agree that staying at OPRF is much more convenient and possibly cost efficient. Wrapping up, the main reason that we and so many other students don't want to graduate at UIC is because we're simply not graduating from UIC. I went to OPRF. Friday night football games were in that stadium. Every fun fire drill where we got to escape a couple math equations, we left right out those doors and onto that turf. Last year after the Parkland shooting, a wave of activism hit our school like never before, and we walked right out to that turf to share our condolences with each other as one unit and began to be the responsible adults that OPRF has raised us to be. For me, since 6th grade, tough cross-country workouts have been in that stadium, and honestly, more importantly, we beat Fenwick in that animal soccer game right out there in that field last week. Our memories are here, and no matter what momentum we bring to UIC, it can never add up to the beauty and immense amount of memories we hold at this school. Most importantly, we should not let this debate on the venue and attire overshadow the accomplishments of the class of 2019. Whether we are walking down the football field in traditional attire with our beautiful school in the background, or moving into UIC basketball court with the caps and gowns, we should not allow debate and discussion to ruin anyone's graduation. Thank you so much for your time.
Hi, my name is Nico Gonzalez-Stuber, and I'm a senior here at OPRF. I've come to express concerns regarding the changes to graduation. I attended the meeting last night hosted by Mr. Rouse where these changes were discussed. I was hoping to gain some form of closure about graduation, but unfortunately, I was still left with questions. Something that has been especially frustrating is the lack of student outreach on the ceremony changes. My class has seen several years before us have the opportunity to vote on attire, yet that option has been taken from us. This disappoints me because I feel giving young people a voice and encouraging them to speak their mind is crucial, especially in today's culture and political climate. The concerns about the lack of voting were brought up last night, and we were told that there is no vote on the change because it will be in favor of keeping the traditional attire, and that is not what the administration wants. I ask you, what message are we sending to the students of OPRF by taking away their voice on their own graduation, only because what the majority of students want is not what the administration wants? When Mr. Rouse left the meeting, many students still felt unhappy, so we stayed to discuss the matters further. We quickly came up with alternatives to the graduation changes. Many students felt there could be a compromise by wearing caps and gowns but still have the ceremony at OPRF. Graduating from UIC while in new caps and gowns would just not feel like an OPRF graduation. If you choose to further ignore the students' opinions on attire changes, we should at least be able to vote on the venue change. Another idea brought up was the abundance of space on the football field. The students were confused on why we could not simply find a way to add more seating on the field itself to increase the number of tickets available. Frankly, it's a football field. There is a lot of room to work with. We also discussed why every student receives 5 tickets for graduation when some just don't need it. Many said they only need 2 or 3, and the extra tickets should go to those who have larger families. There should be a way to keep the ceremony at OPRF by having students only take the tickets they need, so there are more available to others. All of these changes of the ceremony just seem to be a quick fix without truly thinking of other solutions. I asked the board and the administration to please listen to the students' opinions on the matter, because aren't these changes supposed to be about our convenience? There are so many compromises and alternatives that could be made. At the end of the day, this is our high school graduation, so we deserve to be heard in the matter. Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Madeline Wisenheim, and I'm a senior. While I do believe that the traditional attire has a lot of benefits, and it has been in our school history for several years, I also believe that changing to caps and gowns is more equitable and it's more fitting for every student at OPRF. Although some students might not want to wear a cap and gown and prefer to wear a long white dress or a suit, they can wear that underneath the By changing to cap and gowns, it's more equitable for all students, cost effectively, and how they identify. The students at our school that are non-gender conforming, gender fluid, or transgender might not feel comfortable wearing the designated outfit or their sex. And although they can wear anything in the color scheme, the traditional one is where women wear long white dresses and boys wear suits, which is really conforming, and it's also really constricting. And it makes a lot of students feel uncomfortable. And last year we had a bunch of students not walk because they didn't feel safe and comfortable in what they were wearing in their graduation attire. I feel as though it is our school, and so we should have a say in it. But if we put it to a vote, and if our senior body class does vote to it, the students who it affects the most that don't feel comfortable wearing anything other than a cap and gown, they're always going to be in the minority, and the students who aren't affected by it at most are going to win, because there's more of us that aren't extremely affected by it. It's also more cost effective because I can guarantee that not every single person in O'Hara has a suit in their closet, which are expensive. And I don't have a white long dress in my closet, which causes me to go buy one, which are also hard to find. I also think that you can wear whatever you want underneath the gown, and it allows students to feel more like they have choices and like they're not constricted to something. And it also gives us a sense of diversity, and also lets us have unity, because our school has been forcing equity, which is so important, and they've been stressing it, which is so important. But if we don't have caps and gowns, it's not unified, and I don't see the point in not being unified as a school. Thank you.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name is Naomi.
I'm Kayla, I'm a senior.
I'm Janice, I'm also a senior. So we're all seniors, and we're also for cap and gowns. So although we might not all agree on the graduation attire, cap and gowns will alleviate many issues. If someone wishes to wear traditional attire, they can wear it under their cap and gowns and take pictures without the cap and gown afterwards. This also allows trans and non-binary students not to be forced to come out when they are not ready to. Although the traditional attire is valued greatly in our community, it isolates many students. We can create new traditions of individualism through decorating our own caps. And if OPRF claims to be pro-LGBTQ+, but then ignores the issues of LGBTQ+ people or students for the sake of tradition and aesthetic, we are failing our students.
I just wanted to touch on the venue portion. I'm for the UIC venue change, because to me it's more stable, that I don't have to worry about like if it's going to rain or what the weather will be like, depending on Mother Nature, when I know it's a strict plan for the UIC that will just, and if there's a schedule, like if there's time consuming, plan ahead, I need to leave at this time, making sure I make it downtown and get there for a seat. Secondary, my family is huge. I would hate to tell like my grandmother or somebody that, hey, I don't have a ticket for you, because even though it takes a village to raise a child, you're just not going to be able to come because I only have 5 tickets. If you have UIC, it's unlimited, and you avoid so many different problems and issues just having it at UIC. You can bite wherever you want. It can have air conditioning, or if we have a heater, the elderly who sit on the corner could be burning up sitting while we're sitting on the turf, which is like higher temperature. So I think, yeah.
Also with UIC, or also having graduation here at OPRF, even if we add more space and we have a ton more seating, and we somehow were able to accommodate as many people as UIC would be able to, if it rains, that doesn't matter. So you only get 2 tickets. So it's just a lot safer for more people to have, to go up to UIC, because if I only had 2 tickets, I don't even know who I would give the 2 tickets to. Like, that would just be heartbreaking, so, yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other students that want to make public comment? and we will move to our, other comments. I will just plug for our town hall, which will be all about answering questions about Imagine. I did see that there were people signed up for public comment here, and that evening will be the opportunity to go beyond, making a comment and have, a dialogue with the board. So I'd like, you all to keep that in mind as well.
Amanda Massey.
Good evening, my name is Amanda Massey. I live in the 100 block of Southeast Avenue. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, perfect. Acknowledging that all decisions of consequence should be based on fact, our group, OPRF Pragmatic Solutions, has conducted research and compiled and analyzed key data for your review. A few members of our group will assist in presenting this information to you tonight. You have important decisions ahead that will impact our school and our community in a very significant way. And your decisions should be based on fact and actual needs, not wants. The reality is that D200 can no longer fund expensive wants. The lasting legacy of America to me should be that our limited education dollars should be used to improve academic outcomes for all of our students and to best prepare them for life after graduation so that each and every student steps confidently into their future. That mission, that legacy aligns with our community values. With Imagine's proposed plan, you are considering demolishing a structurally sound southeast corner of the building to construct a 10-lane competition pool with dedicated diving well, a luxury for any high school. This pool will also offer 10 practice swim lanes. Imagine refers to the pool as an 8-lane competition pool with a diving well. But high school swim lanes can be 7 feet wide, so Imagine's proposed pool is actually a 10-lane competition pool with a diving well. It's a large pool by any standard. While the Imagine group says the pool costs only $2.5 million, the cost for digging the hole in the pool's mechanicals and liner, yet in reality, the entire $66 million price tag for Sequence 2 is an associated pool cost, as this pool, that's double the size of a high school competition pool, can't be built without demolishing and rebuilding the structurally sound building. Based on the 2014 cost estimates of $80 to $87 million to build a 37-meter pool, the same size as this 40-yard pool, it's cost prohibitive to build this pool within the existing building. That was the finding of the 2014 Pool Site Committee. Yet that's not true of the other elements in Sequence 2, as they can be accommodated by renovating the existing building. They don't require the building to be demolished. There is no line item cost for the 600-seat aquatic center, and no cost has been released. It appears to be hidden in a category called community/shared spaces. Many of the Imagine cost estimates lack transparency. We haven't had time yet to go through the new cost estimates being released in tonight's meeting, but we hope that they are presented clearly and transparently. In fact, the fact is OPRF doesn't need this size pool and aquatic center. They are expensive wants, and our limited education dollars should not be used to fund wants of schools of aquatics teams and the wants of private swim clubs. Our limited educational dollars must be used to support our true needs of our school, all the students.
Thank you, Mr. Data.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kitty Conklin, and I live at 928 North Lombard. Despite repeated requests by the community over the past few years, and as recently as a couple of months ago for you, the D200 board, to review and update the school's outdated swimming requirement, no action has been taken. The self-imposed mandatory swimming requirement is being used to inflate the need for pool water. It is reasonable and prudent for a school to conduct a comprehensive review of a program before undertaking a major and expensive replacement project. Despite claims to the contrary, the pool is a key driver of the $218 million proposed facility plan. Our report centers on the school's physical education swim requirement relative to other area schools. When we learned that the Imagine Group had conducted research into the PE swim requirements of area high schools and also collected data on recent Chicagoland high school pools, we FOIA'd the information and used it as a starting point for conducting our own research. We included all of the schools in Imagine's 2 distinct studies in our review of PE swim requirements. But Imagine didn't include all area schools in its swim requirement study. Schools such as Fenwick, which had no PE swim requirement, weren't included in Imagine's review. The schools Imagine included appear to be random. For example, Imagine did not include all of the schools in OPRF's own conference, the West Suburban Conference. Some of those schools have no pool and no swimming requirement. OPRF Pragmatic Solutions included all of the schools in the conference, and we also broke the data down to the Silver Division, which is OPRF's division within the conference. Our review included 50 schools compared to Imagine's 26 schools. Imagine used general terms only, such as less than a quarter, or more than a quarter to describe each school's respective swim requirement. But that's vague and really doesn't tell the true story. A quarter is 9 weeks. Our information is specific to the actual number of days of swimming required and presents a more accurate picture of the school's respective requirements. We compiled the information of area schools' swim requirements into an easy-to-read chart called, and you have it, Evaluation of Required Swim Curriculum for Suburban Chicago Area High Schools. It clearly shows where OPRF's phys ed swim requirement is in relation to its peer schools. At the October 3rd Imagine Community Conversation, co-chair Mike Poirier stated that the Imagine Group's research of swim requirements at area high schools showed that 70% of the schools had the same or more PE swimming required as OPRF.
Ms. Thompson, excuse me, I'm gonna have to stop it there. The 3 minutes are up, and we do have others that want to make comments.
Okay.
Thank you, and we do have the written report.
Good evening, I'm Bill Gale, 925 North Euclid. I'm just continuing. In fact, OPRF requires substantially more swimming time than its peers in every category. It requires on average 3 times more days of swimming than its peers in the Western Suburban Conference, and 2 times more days of swimming than its peers in the Silver Division. In our review of 50 schools, OPRF requires on average twice as many days of swimming as the other schools. In Imagine's own review of swim requirements, OPRF requires 60 days of swimming to the average 37 days of swimming at other schools. We have copies of the evaluation for you, and the collected data is also aggregated into charts. In addition to our research, here are some basic facts about high school swim programs. Swimming is not a state nor a federal high school graduation requirement. Many schools have no swim requirement or a pool on campus. A pool is a luxury. The construction cost and a pool's routine operating and scheduled repair costs are often too high and unsustainable for many school districts. Based on the Park District's research, if children don't learn to swim by 3rd grade or so, they are less likely to ever learn how to swim. Realistically, the focus for any high school swimming program should be water safety. Based on responses to our FOIA requests over the last 2 years, we have learned the following. OPRF spends nearly $1 million a year on PE swim salaries and incidentals. That figure includes no pool cost. The merits of the swim program are unsubstantiated. A request to obtain exit testing outcomes to measure the swimming proficiency gained through the PE swim classes came up empty. The FOIA findings align with the statement made by then school board president during the 2016 pool referendum campaign. He said, while the classes conduct a pre-testing, there is no exit testing. The time is now for you, the District 200 board, to insist on an objective and comprehensive review of the school's self-imposed and burdensome PE swim requirement. It realistically needs to be addressed before any decision is made to spend $66 million to demolish a building for an unneeded 10-lane competition pool and dedicated diving well to benefit fewer than 100 unique students who participate in the school's IHSA aquatic teams in a given year. Imagine's other chart, recent Chicagoland High School pools, and its information that looks at the size of pools built by other area high schools since 1996 is irrelevant to OPRF's pool discussion. None of those other schools had to demolish a structurally sound building to construct their pools.
Thank you.
My name is Gina Sinello, and I live at 162 North Scoville. OPRF has never presented a transparent and comprehensive review of the cost to operate and maintain a long-stretch pool. What is the cost? What does it cost to operate and maintain a standard-sized high school competition pool? Given the realities of our tax-burdened community, all costs, construction, operating, maintenance, must be considered and are weighed as a value to the students, the school, the community, and to its taxpayers. D200 commissioned a statistically significant survey in 2016 to assess the community's interest in the then proposed pool plans and related questions. The FACO report concluded that a pool at the high school was not a priority for the community. There are, however, two viable pool solutions. Either one offers you, the D200 board, a rational choice that would be in the best interest of all stakeholders today and tomorrow. OPRF Pragmatic Solutions supports two solutions. Neither requires total demolition of the structurally sound south end of the building, and both would create space within the building. One solution is a standard size pool in the east pool south gym area. The rational pool solution was featured in the Leggett 2016 pool plan, the Stanek 2013 report, and the White report in 2003. The other solution would be a joint pool partnership between D200 and the Park District to create a year-round aquatic resource in Ridgeland Commons for the school and the community. The price tag for either pool is under $20 million. There are two high school swimming programs worth mentioning in this discussion. The focus for both is water safety. First, Stevenson High School's PE swim program, which is best practice, includes a test-out option for students who already know how to swim. A school official says that half of their students don't test out and are required to take one session of swimming, and it ranges from 3 to 6 weeks, depending on the need. Students who test out choose another PE option. Stevenson's entire PE program is choice-based.
Thank you. Monica.
Thank you. I'm Monica Sheehan, 626 Fair Oaks. The other high school PE swim program that's relevant to this conversation is Glenbard North. While it has no pool on campus, it does have a PE swim requirement. All students take one session of swimming 3 weeks in length, usually in one's freshman or sophomore year. The PE swim classes are held during the school day. A bus takes students to the Park District pool that's 1 mile away from the school. The same program could be replicated here with a joint pool partnership with the Park District at Ridgeland Commons. A summer school option could also be offered. Both the Stevenson and Glenbard North PE swim programs are logical, reasonable, and cost-effective. If D200 swim requirement is to be forward-thinking, it should incorporate a test-out option and reduce the number of days of required swimming. Any required high school PE swim program should be based on water safety. Given all of this information, does Imagine's proposed 10-lane competition pool with its dedicated diving well and its substantial ongoing maintenance costs, as well as its 600-seat aquatic center, align with our community's values? And is it the very best use of our limited educational dollars? Based on the FACO survey, the community's answer is no. Relatedly, it is a false narrative that much of the cash reserve can be used to fund any facility plan. The cash reserve is already spoken for. It's going to be drawn down substantially over the next 5 years, as it's earmarked to offset the school's deficit spending, according to D200's 5-year financial projections released in October 2017. Every dollar spent from the cash reserve for any facility improvement moves our community $1 closer to an operating referendum. Based on the projections report and a statement by the school's chief financial officer at a December 2017 school board meeting, an operating referendum is already a possibility in 2023. And I have time. In fact, going back to our prior note, OPRF requires substantially more swimming time than its peers in every category. It requires, on average, 3 times more days of swimming than its peers in the West Suburban Conference, and 2 times more days of swimming than its peers in the Silver Division. One note on our research, we have 3 schools that we're waiting to get confirmation on their swim times, and as soon as we do, we will email you that those findings, and we all thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Susan Stock.
Good evening. My name is Sue Stock. I'm the parent of a OPRF senior, and I did send written versions of these comments I had, but I'm glad to share them in this meeting as well. My comments are in reference to the graduation attire. I want to first thank the board, Dr. Pruitt-Adams, Mr. Rouse, and the many dedicated staff and students for the steps OPRF has taken towards the inclusion of trans, gender nonconforming, and gender fluid students over this past year. As the parent of a trans student, I am aware of the wonderful support they have received, but also aware of the many microaggressions my child has experienced during their time at OPRF related to their gender identity. As the parent of a student who spoke to you all from this podium at the board meeting where the vote to adopt the inclusion policy was taken, I'm really grateful for the care, the attention, and the validity these issues have received and continue to receive. But the work is not done. I support the language of the agenda item and ask that the tradition of binary gender identification at graduation be discontinued. This is an antiquated tradition that simply no longer makes sense, especially in the light of the policies and procedures that were adopted in the spring. It is akin to asking all students to declare their racial or ethnic identity, but giving them only 2 options, African American and Caucasian. And so if you're South Asian, if you're multiracial, you're out of luck. You've got to choose one of these 2 options. And then we would require them to wear a garment that would demonstrate that identity out of those 2 options. To think about it that way seems ridiculous. We would not do this for race. We do not do this for race. Why do we want to continue to do that for gender? My child will graduate this spring. This is a request for OPRF as a large institution to change the graduation tradition, but it's also a very personal request, as this will greatly impact my family. My child will likely not attend graduation. They are forced to publicly identify themselves as either male or female. Although student voices are incredibly important, I do encourage you to not decide this simply by putting it to a student vote. To do that would just pass along the responsibility, and as a student already said earlier, when there is a majority rule vote, by definition, minorities lose out. Rather, I advocate for the administration of OPRF to take a stand and to extend the policies and procedures already put into place with the earlier board vote this spring. Eliminating the practice of requiring binary gender identification at graduation would be a hugely symbolic and important step. Please adopt the caps and gowns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maureen Kleinman.
Hi, Maureen Kleinman, 245 North Kenilworth. I'll start with a very brief comment. No. Make it a little longer. Absolutely not. We'll go with 3 words. Are you crazy? Maybe 4. You must be crazy. Okay, so now that we're theoretically at $218 million for the total of the 5 sequences, not including the cost of borrowing or inflation. That does not even get us any new or renovated classrooms for academic or vocational or technical use or applied arts. Those improvements, along with the associated $15 million cost, which is technically part of the $28 million Phase 1 or Sequence 1 estimate, those have actually been shifted to Sequence 4. So, any new or renovated academic, vocational, or applied arts classrooms are in the distant future. That brings the cost of the project for the first two sequences down to a level that can be funded from reserves and from non-referendum funding sources. So much for OPRFHS educating and preparing its students for college or careers. But boy, they sure will have nice PE facilities. Okay, I've been pretty negative, so now I'd like to offer a constructive comment. Since Oak Park is home to so many iconic buildings designed by the iconic architect Franklin Wright, may I suggest that this project deserves to have its own iconic architect. Forget about the no-names you've been working with. They're large, very reputable firms, but they're run-of-the-mill. You need to think of something iconic. So I suggest going with Studio Gang, led by Illinois' own Jean Gang. She is perhaps best known locally for the iconic Aqua Building down on North Columbus Drive, and also the Wanda Tower, which is being built nearby. These are the largest projects ever awarded to an American architectural firm headed by a woman. So if you're going to do it right and do it proud. Make it a statement building, one that will draw tourists from all around the world in the great tradition of Oak Park architecture. The Studio Gang designed Oak Park River Forest High School Aquatic and Sports Complex. Thank you.
Monique. Monique.
Good evening. My name is Monique Gunn, and my daughter is Grace Gunn. She has stood before you once before. She is at one of the leadership conferences that the school is supporting. I asked her to give me words that I could share on her behalf, and she said no. She didn't want me to speak for her, so I get to speak for myself as a parent who has had the opportunity to have a student graduate from OPRF, and I'll have my second and last student, our child, this year graduate from OPRF. And I have to say that I am standing in support of not only the caps and gowns, but also the change in the graduation venue. Most important to me is the change in the venue. I do support the caps and gowns because not only does it provide variety, and so I support all the other reasons that have gone forward for supporting the caps and gowns. But let's not forget that though it's not an tradition for Oak Park to have caps and gowns is a tradition that dates back as far as the 15th century, and it is important to realize and recognize that there are many parents of students who graduated in caps and gowns, so that's another important tradition that could be considered. More so, I want to speak about the venue change. Last year was the most stressful experience in trying to make sure that my daughter had a very memorable experience in her graduation, that she had those who loved her around. It created stress because of the limited amount of tickets, even with 5, that only provided opportunity for my family of 4 and maybe one of the grandmothers to come. And I have a brother who was determined to travel all the way from Colorado, and I was not stopping him from coming. And so another stressor was that, how am I going to make sure he gets in the graduation? You're calling around, whether you know people in Oak Park or not that don't need their tickets. It's all dependent upon that. We had to think of certain things such as, well, should this grandma come or should this grandma come? My husband's mother has dementia, so we should not have to think about, well, she won't remember it anyway. It's not about that. It's about honoring her presence that still is with us. And so the fact that we had to even consider not having her there because of that reason alone, because we're so limited in being able to invite our family and celebrate with them, whether it's at, if it's at UIC, any people's family can come. If it's here, it could be very limited, even more so that only her mother, my child's mother or father can come. Mother and father can come. Her sister can't be there, so it really created a lot of stress. And the thing about preserving the tradition, while it's respected, it shouldn't crush another person's memories that we'll have to live with forever, that her grandmother was not there. And this could be the last decade, and that last year that she lives, those type of things. It should not be that important to try to preserve a tradition and crush the memories of those who are graduating. Some of those who are supporting keeping the tradition of having it at Oak Park, while that's beautiful, and thank God it did not rain. It looked beautiful, but it's not. Thank you.
I'm gonna have to stop you.
Great,
Thank
thanks.
you very much.
Amy Hill.
Good evening. I'm relishing the role of being here,
I just asked who is Amy Hill?
standing here. I'm not sitting over there tonight. I'm Amy Hill. I live at 808 North Lombard Avenue. I am the history division head, and in that capacity, I want to thank you for acknowledging history teacher Mike Stephen, who is one of many fine history teachers. We're very proud that he was recognized by those who excel. But primarily, I'm here as a parent of 2 graduates and a freshman, and I'm here in support of the change of graduation attire for the reasons you've heard, and I just want to try to send one point home to you, which I know matters to you. We're weighing values. We're weighing competing values in this discussion, and 2 of the values that are in somewhat at odds are tradition and social justice. And in my mind, weighing those values, it's an easy win for social justice. I was persuaded probably 2 years ago. This has been an ongoing conversation, as many of you know, going back to the days of Sue Bridge, who was the first to say girls could wear pants. And it's been a long conversation, like many of our other social justice conversations. And I'm very excited about the prospect that this could be the last year. Last year could have been the last year when we will be putting our transgender and non-binary students in the very awkward and uncomfortable position of having to out themselves at graduation on a day that should be devoted to celebration. So I urge you to go with social justice over tradition in this particular case. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sabrina Tellez Brennan.
Hello, good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to really speak to you. And there's been a lot, so this is about the adoption of having caps and gowns at our graduation. And there's been a lot already said about it. The bottom line is that there is a segment of the student population that wouldn't have the same rights as others. And it's our duty to be inclusive of all of them, of that memorable movement that moment when you walk across the stage and you get that diploma and that your family can be there and applaud you and celebrate you and you can walk proudly. And really the bottom line again is there will be a segment of the student population that won't be able to do that. Or if they do, they won't be doing it as who they express and feel for themselves. So they are a minority. They will not be a majority right now. And they're relying on you to be their voice. And so far, you have all been their voice. I'm so proud of our high school and the strides we've made to have this be an equitable, safe, empowering environment. And here's another opportunity to actually prove that that's who we are, which is why we moved here, which is why we stay here. and why I'm here. So thank you so much.
Kevin Papard. Kevin Papard.
I'm Kevin Papard from 715 Thomas. Under Mr. Rouse's new policy, it's okay to wear a hat in the school, but I don't agree with that policy. So I'm going to take it off into the deference to the volunteer board members who spend a couple hundred hours a year on your work. I know that because my dad once sat in Dr. Jackie's seat. I know how hard you work. I want to speak on several things. One of the graduation requirement, I think the attire should change to caps and gowns on behalf of poor students and also the transgender issue. I think that's an easy call. I think but we should keep the tradition of holding it on campus, not someplace that's 8 or 10 miles away, but where we can bond to our own institution. And my friend, John Phelan, who I consider to be the Augustus Caesar of past board members, I know is going to speak right after me on the same issue, and we talked briefly, and he may agree with me on those two issues. Also, I will speak on the 30th with regard to your $218 million issue here. I believe that will have to be financed in 3 different tranches, and it will take up to 40 years, and most of us will be dead. I know I will be, because I'll be 109 years old. That you can't possibly put that number together because your debt limit is 152 million or whatever it is at the moment. And you can pull some tricks at the start, but then you're going to run out of that bag of tricks, as I've called it in an email to you. And you're going to have to get serious about priorities and what it is you want done, because you're not going to be able to get all this done. You have to have some financial limits, you have to have some time constraints, and you have to have some priorities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ginger Kalamusi.
Good evening. My name is Ginger Kolomusi, and I'm a social worker here at OPRF. Though I am reading a statement today on behalf of a parent who could not be here, I've had the pleasure of working with and getting to know this parent-student very well during my time here at OPRF. The parent's name is Jane Deidelberg, and she is the parent of a current OPRF junior. She says, I am writing to you in support of the proposal to adopt a new dress code for graduation attire at OPRF. The current dress code is outmoded, discriminatory, and out of step with community values and needs to be updated. Our school strives to be at the cutting edge with course offerings, technology, training, policies, and activities. It therefore baffles me why, in the face of students who are so uncomfortable with it that they choose to miss their own graduations, that this district continues to impose this dress code. I have read comments that a dress code that allows male or female students to wear either A, a suit, or B, a dress or pantsuit is fair to everyone. I'd like to take a moment to explain why this is not the case. If the dress code were anything you like if it is black or white, then it would not impose such a burden on non-binary and transgender students. But by framing the choices in terms of gender-specific clothing, students are forced into choosing how to present that day via uncomfortable gender stereotypes. They can fit in box A by wearing a suit and then be identified as male. Or they can fit in box B by wearing a dress, skirt, or pantsuit and then be identified as female. There is not an option to say both or neither, because whichever they choose, they are by the terms of the dress code forced to conform to one set of expectations or the other. For transgender students who, for example, are not out to grandparents or their teachers or others in attendance at graduation, they have to either be forcibly outed by their choice or hide themselves. In cap and gown, they do not have to hide anything, and they don't have to meet anyone's gender stereotypes. For students who identify as agender, non-binary, gender fluid, having to make the choice of which part of themselves to leave behind at graduation is demeaning and depressing. For some portion of this population, just being faced with a choice of no good options can cause a panic attack. In these cases, a choice of dress or suit does not provide a chance to express their individuality, an argument I have heard for eschewing cap and gown. It forces them to hide their true selves or skip graduation. These are not hypothetical students. These are actual, current, and former OPRF students. And for what reason is such a burden being placed on these students? For our idea of a nice photograph? For those who object that the word imposed does not apply here because students have in the past voted on the issue, may I point out that allowing a majority to make the rules that only adversely impacts a small minority is not any kind of democracy. A vote by only girls that the boys must wear ties wouldn't be considered fair, and this isn't either. I urge you to consider what the compassionate decision is, what the enlightened decision is, and whether denying students the right to celebrate their own selves and identities at their graduation for the sake of photographs can be justified.
Thank you, Ms. Kalamazoo. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to stop you.
I had one sentence left, but okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. John Phelan.
My name is, well, you guys know what my name is, and I live at 600 Thatcher River Forest, John Phelan, and I am up to talk about tradition. I'm here to talk about venue. I'm here to talk about attire and to provide a little context. Now, a lot of you know me. I don't get up here much, even though I used to be here all the time. And I only come when it's important. And I want to make sure that I express the importance of the traditions that we've been talking about tonight, because it's easy enough to see things happen on the field, to watch the ceremony and say, oh, that looks nice, but it's hard to understand the pride after you walk off, and 30 years later, 40 years later, 35 years later for me, to really appreciate that and how much some people in this community feel, how strongly they feel about the institution they grew up in, and a lot of people come back here. So that pride of the community is an asset of the community, and it's political capital, and you're going to spend it as you make decisions. And there's a lot of things you're going to need to spend it on as we change with the times. So I'll transition into venue. Venue is not somewhere to spend that political capital. I'm a father of 6 children. I've had 3 children graduate from the high school and go through graduation. I have to make those decisions all the time on what to do with tickets. That's been true for people for 50 years who've had to make those decisions. And there's room to make more room on that football field. As somebody said, you can change the orientation of the graduation, do a lot of things, but to make a different decision and move us to a different place when in fact that is the place where even the students who you had come up first, because they are the most important, have said how important it is to them. I don't see the justification, I don't see the compelling reason for making a change to that kind of a tradition and spending that political capital. Turning to the attire, I very much like the traditional attire, and I know that for well over 100 years, this isn't just a short tradition, but it's been a source of pride. Ever since this issue came up, I've been seeing pictures sent to me by my classmates who still keep it and others. So it's very important, but there's a much more compelling reason to consider that change. I liked what I heard about wear black and white, whatever you want, as long as it's black and white. That made a lot more sense to me than going to caps and gowns, because we in Oak Park are proud. We think we're different. We've gone through this ceremony different for many years, and that makes sense. And just to give some context to how important it is, I just want to share a story that I heard from a guy who was a project manager of Euro Disney when it was opening. This project manager hired all of the industrial cleaning staff from the hospitals and the schools and other institutions around to come in the night before and just scour the park and clean it up. And he got a panicked call the morning, just hours before the opening, because this staff who didn't understand and appreciate it had gone and cleaned the Haunted Mansion. They cleaned away the cobwebs and fixed the broken windows. And the park had opened without one of its primary attractions. So I just come up here to make sure you understand the depth of how many in the community feel about these traditions as you consider whether to cast them aside. Thanks for your time, both before this and after it.
Eve Catterbone.
Good evening. I am Eveline Catterbone. I live at 155 North Humphrey. I'm speaking about the graduation attire. I am a mother to 3 children, and I live in a home with 8 children. All of them have come through OPRF. Our youngest is now a freshman. My son went through graduation last year, and he is transgender. He was out and had transitioned by the time he graduated, so it really was not an issue for us as far as attire, but there are so many other children who it can be an issue for, and I'm here to speak on their behalf. My son, who is not here today, was having a hard time deciding whether or not to go to graduation last year. Not because of his outfit, but he was concerned about other people who were not comfortable. He's not so outspoken, and he had a very hard time making his space here. But he did get through school, and we were very proud of him, and he wanted to graduate more than anything. So the day was very important for us and our family, and it was upsetting to me that he considered not going to graduation because of the people that he knew who could not express themselves or be themselves on that day. So I think, in my opinion, that caps and gowns would be much better for those who have anxiety about what to wear and who they are. And it is, after all, a day to celebrate your achievements academically and not a fashion statement. Thank you.
V. Thomas.
Good evening. I'm one of them grandparents that they talked about. And I'm very supportive. I'm Grace Gunn, grandmother. And I had the opportunity to be at the graduation last year. It was a last minute for my mother to be able to come because someone came up with a ticket. It was poor viewing when you're on that field, because you can't see which way the kids are coming, because they're coming from every which way. They can't come up on the stage because they have specialties up on the stage. So everybody can't see their kids when they're graduating. I think making that move, and it's time for a change. It's time for us to open up our minds. It's not our time anymore. It's these kids' time now. And so we should listen to them and, make a change. It's nothing wrong with changing. Sometimes it helps. It makes a difference. And then we talk about expense. It saves expenses having caps and gowns. Most of these kids don't even wear the clothes that they have in the closet. So parents won't have to go out to buy. But ones who can't afford not to get anything, they can wear what they have at home. For the ones who have extra amount of clothing, their parents don't have to go out and buy anything. Pay $27 or whatever it is for the cap and gown, and you save some money. You also save on flowers. I don't know what the roses cost, but that's a savings. And put it toward another different change as far as where you're going to have seating at. It's a number of us. Like my son will come in from Colorado. He can bring his own family, his wife, because there was a limited amount and we had to beg up or get last minute tickets and took a chance for him coming. It should not be like that. You should be able to get as many tickets as you want to. So if you have a facility where you can do that at, it would be great to have that, and where you can see your kids march up on the stage and take good pictures of them. So I'm not gonna prolong this. I did anything that everybody else said. Yeah. Please think about it.
Thank you. Michael Stuck.
Hello, my name is Michael Stack, 629 North Grove Avenue. I'm a 22-year resident and parent in Oak Park. And first, thank you for all you do. Really appreciate it. Sincerely. My focus, my comments are going to be related to the Imagine Oak Park River Forest concept. First thing I'd like to say is I'm not a part of Oak Park Pragmatic Solutions. But I am concerned with the cost and the public's concern that it addresses athletics over the expense of academics. There's a great distrust in the community as a result of the previous capital improvement process that tried to bypass the voters. Regarding the current well-thought-out plan, that same lack of trust is brewing. I submit that you must present multiple options and their costs to the community, including options that reduce the overall cost and may eliminate certain athletic programs, whatever they may be. Please work to improve the community's and understanding and trust in Oak Park River Forest facilities planning.
Thank you. Nico Gonzalez. Oh, right. Teresa Jurgas.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here to speak about the Imagine proposal. I want to ask the board to consider this opportunity carefully. We can only make improvements of this magnitude once. Prioritize accessibility, academics, and community spaces like libraries, the cafeteria, and the student center, along with important, long overdue arts and athletic improvements tailored to complement and support those priorities, being academics and accessibility. In a building of this age, that's extraordinarily important. Please be careful with the resources this large of a project will require. It will impact every family and every business. And many of our small local businesses are also residents of the community. I have 3 questions. Will the board require alternative plans with smaller athletic footprint incorporating a 25-meter pool? Will the board require a comparative analysis of building an entirely new facility? This will enable the community to compare renovations versus replacement costs. Finally, will the board put the final plan to a referendum? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Lynn Cavanista.
Sorry. Hi, good evening. My name is Lynn Kamenitsa, and I'm the co-chair of the Imagine OPRF work group that is creating a long-term facilities master plan for our school. There's been a lot of false and misleading information about the facilities plan being spread via letters, online comments, flyers, and social media lately. You may even hear some of that misinformation repeated tonight. I want to take a moment to provide some accurate information and to suggest that residents visit imagineoprf.org to find more accurate information. Here are a few examples of some of the misinformation being spread. The false claim: there are no STEM labs included in the plan. The truth is that the S in STEM stands for science, and all OPRF science labs are replaced or renovated during the plan. The false claim is that the Imagine plan includes an Olympic-sized pool, which I just read again in the paper today. The truth is that the plan replaces 2 pools with 1 pool that is signed to support existing programs and return diving to campus. This does not require an Olympic-sized pool, and an Olympic-sized pool would be 49% larger than the pool that we are proposing. Another misleading claim was that the cost for the 2 of the 5 phases hasn't been disclosed and that line item expenditures lack detail. Detailed cost information is available at imagineoprf.org. It was posted on September 9th, and more detail was added on October 4th. Then, in response to community questions, we had costs estimated for sequences 4 and 5, and those were made public this week. Another false claim, that the cost of implementing the entire plan would be $250 million. That number was made up and continues to be presented as fact. The actual cost is $31 million less than that. False claim, facilities needs are not clearly defined. Truth, a 56-page document detailing identified needs has been available at imagineoprf.org since September 9th. And finally, the misleading claim that there's an emphasis on extracurricular activities over the school's core mission of education. This plan starts with a new library and tutoring center and goes on to renovate or rebuild virtually all of the general classrooms and science labs in the building, including 76 classrooms in Sequence 1 alone. That's in addition to new or renovated arts, CTE, special ed, and PE classrooms. Imagine sees all aspects of students' education as important, and our plan reflects that. What's more, extracurriculars take place in the same spaces where classes are taught. This plan provides flexibility to accommodate both extracurricular and curricular use of those spaces because extracurriculars are important to students' academic success and it's important to their sense of connection to our school. In short, you can't believe everything you read right now in letters, online comments, flyers, or social media. And I hope that you, members of the board, will encourage residents to come to their own conclusions, not by prejudging, but based on accurate information that's available at imagineoprf.org. Thank you so much.
Ryan Magnuson.
Hi, my name is Ryan Magnuson. I live at 1134 South Grove, and I'm in the Imagine OPRF work group that is creating a long-term facilities master plan for our school. Prior to Imagine, I had not been involved in any local civic efforts. I decided to get involved after I voted no to the last referendum. I felt called to this work given my professional background in strategic capital planning and real estate development. I've approached this work with integrity and a sincere obligation to do what is right for my family, my neighbors, and my extended OPRF community. I'm very proud of the work that we have accomplished. From almost day one, there has been an effort to label myself and this group as not representative of this community and to mislead the community about the work being delivered. To that end, I've been disappointed but not surprised by the recent claims about the master plan being spread on Facebook, op-eds, and in flyers along the L platforms. I want to take a moment to provide some accurate information and to suggest that residents visit imagineoprf.org to find more. You may have read this claim. Only one plan option was presented to the community. Here's the truth. Imagine solicited community input at every stage of this process. Multiple plan options were presented on April 16th, revised plans were presented on May 19th, plans were further refined and presented over the summer at public board meetings and have ultimately led to a single proposal as it is presented today. All of these prior concepts were posted and continue to be available at imagineoprf.org. You may have also read this claim. This will be the third most expensive school project in America. Here is the truth. The master plan does not represent a single project. The master plan represents many projects, all of which may be funded in their own time, regardless of our proposed timeline. It combines projects into 5 potential sequences. Funding and constructing elements in a single sequence does not require the district to fund the remaining sequences. Just like replacing your roof does not obligate you to replace your kitchen, even if you need to do both. In closing, I am proud to have been a part of this group of local taxpayers known as Imagine OPRF, and I recommend the board adopt this plan. And I'll leave the board with this quote by Teddy Roosevelt. "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong stumble, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to those who are actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strive valiantly, who err, who come short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who know great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spend themselves in a worthy cause, who at the best know in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if they fail, at least fail while daring greatly, so that their place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." Thank you.
Catherine Schreiber?
Good evening. I'm Kathleen Troljan, 737 Highland. I'm the parent of 3 recent graduates, former employee of District 200, and 25-year resident of Oak Park. With the conclusion of America to me, and the painful truth it exposes about the lack of equity and the failed leadership inside the walls of the school, the disconnect between the proposed Imagine OPRF boondoggle and what we should really be trying to imagine for this school and this community is agonizing. If the true intended outcome of the $200 million plus plan is to ultimately change the demographic of Oak Park so that we're no longer challenged by issues of equity, then by all means push it through. However, I'm hopeful that the good people of this community and the board recognize the need to prioritize and see that it may not be possible to get everything we want. We may have to sacrifice to get those things that are best. It makes no sense to rebuild and restore the exterior of a structure until its core is reevaluated and restored. Let our community decide what sort of future it sees for itself. Let us vote on the change we want to imagine. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Brandhorst?
I'm Tim Brandhorst. I'm a River Forest resident and a proud parent of a freshman, and I'm a member of the Imagine team. When you run a marathon, you're standing at the starting line. You don't think about the finish line. You don't think about what's going to happen along the course. The way you start a marathon is you take one step forward and then another. You create momentum, not enough to carry you through all 26 miles, but enough to set your direction and begin the race. And so it is with this board and the long-term facilities master plan. We find ourselves at the start of a long journey. It's now been 50 years since our community made a meaningful capital improvement investment in this facility. You're not going to overcome the results of 50 years of inaction in a year or two or one term in office. All you can do is start. It will be for other future boards to keep the momentum going. When Imagine submits its final recommendation in November, please take that first step. Adopt the long-term master facilities plan that you asked the Imagine team to develop. Imagine's master plan addresses the entire facility. The updated aquatic center is just one aspect, and frankly, it's not remotely the most interesting one. There are some in the community who really think that the entire Imagine process is about a pool. And the board is going to have to deal with that segment of the community and that perception. But there are others in the community who use talk of a pool as a strategy. What they're saying to you is, don't act. Don't invest. Do nothing. When we go out and we talk to people at PTO meetings and the farmer's market and just around town, people in our community want to know what's in the master plan, and when they learn the truth, when they actually hear the details of the plan, and they understand the long-term consequences, they support it. They want to know the facts, and they want to hear those facts from this board. So all of us on the Imagine team encourage the community to attend next week's town hall, to hear for themselves what the plan is, what the plan is not. And all of us on the Imagine team encourage the board to take the first step forward, to adopt the plan, to set a direction, and to begin a journey that will surely last many years into the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Denise McDermott?
I have been eager. I thought maybe you had forgotten me. I'm Denise McDermott. I've had 3 kids go through Oak Park River Forest a long time ago. But I do want to make a little plug for my son, whose article is on page 21 of the Tribune today. He was a 2006 graduate, and I think I applaud Oak Park for, starting out his writing chops here. So I hope you'll look at that article. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here for Moms Demand Action. I don't know if everybody knows what Moms Demand Action is. We're for sensible gun laws. We're bipartisan, but we're really concerned about this issue about arming teachers. And I know my co-partner has emailed every one of you this week, and we were hoping that this issue would get on the agenda, and I see it's not. I'm sure you're also familiar with the Illinois Association of School Boards. They are meeting next month, and there's a resolution for student safety protection that they are proposing arming teachers. And you may not, I don't know how this district feels about it. I feel very strongly. And Moms Demand Action, and I can send you all sorts of information. And I have business cards so that you can email me. Because I see here that you will give me a response in 2 weeks. And I want to know who I give this business card to so I get a response, because I want a delegate to go down there and say we do not want to arm teachers in this school. And you might think it's not going to happen, but from being involved in Moms Demand Action, which is nationwide, and we have chapters all over the state, there are a lot of rural, down south school boards that are in favor. And actually, they are, the IASB is in favor of one of the resolutions that they want to lobby for for guns to be in schools. And one more thing, my oldest daughter, who graduated from here, is also a teacher. She's at Trinity High School. So who do I give them my cards to make sure that I get an answer in 2 weeks?
You give your card to Ms. Hamilton, and right there, and Ms. McDermott, it is on the agenda for the special board meeting March 5th. November 5th, I'm sorry.
No, yeah, but the meeting where you need to see it, send a delegate is before that November 5th meeting. So that's really not going to be helpful.
We've also been asked to vote at the joint conference.
And what date is that?
That is later in November.
That's also in November, but this meeting is in September.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I look forward to that in 2 weeks.
Thaddeus Sherman, please.
Good evening. My name is Thaddeus Sherman. I am a counselor here. This is my 5th year. Recently my family and I moved to Oak Park. I want to acknowledge the long traditions that serve noble purposes here at OPRF, such that students, families, staff, and community members experience our school as a family. My contribution tonight would be to ask the board and the community to consider if caps and gowns best represent the vision and mission of our school, specifically with regards to creating the most equitable experience for all students. Is our current grad attire policy one which serves our community in a way that is most equitable? Do caps and gowns serve our community in a way that is more equitable than our current policy? What is the most compassionate response to students who are at odds regarding this issue? I would like to submit that caps and gowns may be one way for the greatest number of students to experience graduation in a way that provides space, support, and a framework through which individual students' identity can be expressed more freely than the current policy. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Is there anyone who did not sign up for public comment that would like to make a comment?
I wrote this on the fly. So, my name is Kim Nepple. I am a resident, 45-year resident and an alumni of OPRF, class of 91. I asked the board, as in years past, to allow students to have a vote and be allowed to share their voice in regards to the graduation, both in regards to the attire and the venue. This should not be a biased debate and vote based on a minority. If all students have a vote, then their voices will be heard. In life, your voice may be heard, but the outcome may not be as you hope you or expected. But that's life. This is what these students have to face as they go off into college. You can't expect universities to change traditions. Think about West Point just because it doesn't fit your needs. As a community and as a parent, I chose to come back to OPRF for one reason, not because of the elementary school, but because of OPRF and the traditions and the pride that I feel till this day about standing on that field, not at UIC. That means nothing to me, that means nothing to any of these children. Standing on that field and what it means to be an OPRF Husky. And I understand that there's only 5 tickets allowed, but again, that's life. That's how it is. Every school does not have unlimited tickets no matter where you are. So please allow these children to have a voice and be heard. If you take away the voice and the vote of the student body at large, what message are you sending to these children? And what message are you sending to these taxpayers who came back here? Not only myself, but my parents are alumni and graduates of this school. I have 4 siblings who are also graduates and pride themselves on the traditions of OPRF. I've heard both sides of this position, and I respect and empathize with both sides of the debate. But as a 1991 alum and a person who's a parent of graduates from OPRF, this tradition that you call it that is outdated, it has nothing to do with fashion, and it has nothing to do with taking a great picture. It has to do with something bigger. This is a unique community. This is why you have people like myself that come back and want to bring their kids and raise their children here. So if tradition has no meaning, then we should all just go away. Go away, forget about tourism, forget about Frank Lloyd Wright and Hemingway. Traditions have great meaning and should mean something. And my daughter, who I'm speaking on behalf of course, is calling me at this very second. So myself and so many OPRF, obviously alums who aren't here to have a voice, I say, I really do, please let these children have a voice. All of them will have a voice. I don't want to see this left up to the board members, out of all due respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, yes. Yes. These will be our last 2 comments.
All right, I didn't run fast enough. I thought it was going to be the last speaker of the evening. Okay.
My name is Melanie McQueen, I'm president of Apple, and I have a comment more to our attendees. First, I want to say tradition is important. There is something to be said about if your child attends Spelman, would you tell them to take their arch down and to not have the parade in? If your child attended Morehouse, would the boys not welcome them in? But there's also something to be said about making a new tradition that fits our students. And not to say that the old tradition was bad. I have been sitting here this entire time listening to comments thinking to myself, wow, we have some critical thinkers in this community. I did not know caps and gowns could get that deep. So, but I have to say, when my daughter graduated back in 2014, and I had the realization that she was not going to have a cap and gown, it was shocking and hurtful. And oh my God, she's not going to have a cap and gown. I can't believe this. Maybe they're going to vote it in. So that part of me did want to see that. But there is also something to be said about graduating where you've been raised for the past 4 years and hopefully making that space here. But if it also makes sense that it should be someplace else and that goes along with the cap and gown, then I support what the board decides. And lastly, before I take my seat, I think it's extremely important to mention, which I have not heard in the past few meetings that I've been in, I appreciate seeing the Imagine OPRF team, a brand new set, new faces that are stepping up and doing things in the community. Thank you. And I also appreciate other groups that challenge, that want to do research and make sure that things are being done right for the community. We're always looking for more leaders, more people who are going to stand up and volunteer for their community, and we're starting to see that. I'm so appreciative to see our students who are coming out larger in numbers about things that they care about. That's really amazing. So I just wanted to say that, and whatever the board decides, I was crushed when we lost our vote and my daughter couldn't wear a cap and gown. But if these kids win, and this is truly what it's supposed to be, then of course support it. Support whatever the board decides. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Adrian Marcus. I've spent the vast majority of my life since 1973 here in Oak Park, and I'm an OPRF alum. I want to make an observation. I'm concerned about what the cost of OPRF Imagine will mean for residential homeowners. I read the local papers. There have been distress signals emanating from the local property market. I believe that former village board president David Pope, who's in the audience, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, told the Wednesday Journal in an article published within the last several months that for middle-class homeowners in Oak Park, the property tax burden has risen so much that the point of no return for them is approaching. The Wednesday Journal has reported that local real estate agents have said that the property tax burden is so high for houses that for Oak Park are on the low end of the theoretical market price range that mortgage lenders won't underwrite mortgages for them because the total cost of ownership, including mortgage payments and property tax payments, is too high relative to the theoretical market value of the houses. They were talking about houses that cost maybe $300,000 that have currently $10,000 in property taxes. Also, they noted during the summer that residential real estate prices had experienced a minor decline recently, and that prospective buyers are talking to them about the property tax issue. There seems to be some resistance among buyers in buying houses that are priced more than $500,000. I'm very concerned what this means for middle-class homeowners going into the future. As someone who's been around Oak Park for decades, I have seen what the effect is when property taxes increase at rates far in excess of income growth and inflation. Just since the year 2000, according to the Wednesday Journal, the property tax revenue from Oak Park has increased 170%. In order to stay a resident in Oak Park for a long period of time and not be forced out, you have to be pretty lucky and have an income that grows, you know, in excess of property taxes. I mean, just in the last 18 years, the property tax rates have probably grown at least 7 or 8% a year. When I moved to Oak Park with my family in 1973, it was
I'm sorry,
common.
sir, but I'm
Oh,
gonna have
sorry.
to stop you. I don't know if you saw the timer, but we're.
Oh, that's fine. I respect the timer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for public comments that we're gonna keep working on it. We're going to take a 5-minute break and then go into the rest of our agenda.
We are at the consent items portion of our agenda, and I will just say now for everyone's edification that I am going to pull items H and I for individual consideration, contract with UIC for graduation venue, and I graduation attire, but ask if there are any other items board members would like to pull. Okay.
I use Zerographic. I got all this.
You have an oath.
I thought you were pulling the Zerographic paper for the bake.
The big cake.
Okay.
Everything other than 8.5 by 11.
Sorry.
We get punchy after 9:30, people apologize. Okay, so I move to approve the following consent items. A, check disbursements and financial resolutions dated October 25th, 2018. B, monthly treasurer's report. C, gifts and donations. D, resolution recognizing the National Hispanic Recognition Program, students. E, personnel recommendations, including new hires, stipend positions. F, notice to remedy for tenured staff member Francisco Arriaga. G, course proposals. J, Zerographic paper bid. K, policies for second reading. Policy 4:60, contracts and purchasing. L, policies for first reading. Policy 2:150, committees. Policy 4:80, accounting and audits. Policy 5:30, hiring process and criteria. Policy 6:240, student travel. Policy 7:50, school admissions and student transfers. And item M, open and closed minutes September 27th and October 16th, 2018, and a declaration that the closed session audio tapes of January 2017 shall be destroyed, and ask for a second.
Second.
Is there any discussion or comment? And we'll ask for a roll vote.
Ms. Cassell? Yes. Mr. Arkin?
Yes.
Mr. Kowski?
Yes.
Ms. Spivey?
Yes.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Mr. Isley?
Yes.
And Dr. Moore?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and I will go back to item H and move to approve contract with UIC for graduation venue, and ask for a second.
Second.
And now we will open it up for questions, comments. Fred?
Okay, I have a statement I want to read. One thing that I've come to realize after 3 years on this board is that we rely on data to make decisions. In the memo recommending the change of graduation venue, there's no foundation or background data to make this decision. I've asked the following questions that go directly to the rationale for the change delineated in the memo, and have not received an adequate response. The questions are, over the past 10 years, how many unfulfilled ticket requests have we received? There's no data. How many times since 1970 has it moved from the stadium because of rain? Once in the last 5 years is all the answer is. What other venues were explored? None. Please provide the number of tickets offered each family for family of graduates for the period of 1970 to 2018 for both indoor and outdoor. The answer came back that currently each family gets 5 tickets outdoors and 2 if it rains. Each of these questions goes directly to the reasoning put forth in the recommendation memo and have not been sufficiently answered with data. No alternative solutions have been explored. Our current class of 781 is substantially less, about 20% less, than the classes of mine and my siblings who graduated in the early 1970s. Each of those years, even in the years with rain, like my brother in 1975, graduation has occurred as a magnificent celebration of our students. Graduation at UIC will not be special or grand, just another high school graduating in their rented facility. Their facility contract in Article 13 has compliance regulations. I don't know if these have been explored or negotiated, but on a brief view of their website states that UIC requires everyone goes through a metal detector, no bags, purses, or backpacks, diaper bags or camera bags. All bags are searched, no professional cameras, no outside food. We in the Oak Park River Forest community take pride in our traditions. We should not be so cavalier to dismiss them so readily. Holding graduation in our community symbolizes the passage from teenager to adulthood in the facility where the accomplishments have occurred. We have no nexus to UIC. Graduation at that venue will not have the grandeur or majesty of generations of ceremonies at the OPRF Stadium. Just watch the final episode of America to Me to see how truly beautiful and special that ceremony is. Holding graduation at UIC will not save the district money. It will either cost the district or the families more money to travel to UIC and pay for parking. Holding graduation at UIC will hurt the OPRF business community. I've spoken to the Chamber of Commerce and to several members. They would not support such a move as it would damage the business community and especially our restaurants who host many family celebrations. In conclusion, there is no data or background to support the reason laid out in this memo. It would cost either the district or our families more money. It'll damage our business community, and therefore I will vote against the recommendation because I see no compelling reason to make this change.
Are there other comments?
So while I'm not quite as adamant as Fred, I do agree with his conclusion. I think that having it at USC would be impersonal. I do think that there's something to be said for having it in our home institution. I also think that there are ways that we could possibly improve on our current ceremony to make it more accessible. Certainly the rain is a constant concern, but I think, if it's an act of God, it's an act of God. But at this point, in terms of exploring other options for seating, we certainly could add more people to that space. I think we could also perhaps improve the view for folks. I think that was a great argument about being able to see your student better at graduation, but we could provide some sort of projection of our students as they're walking up too. There are ways that we can improve upon what we already have. I know that if this doesn't pass tonight, that means that this year's graduating class won't have UIC as an option. I know we're on a time constraint there, but at this point, I don't feel that we've explored our options to an extent that would be necessary for me to support this.
Other comments?
I think Fred did a very good job of expressing in detail some of the concerns I have, and I am in support of it.
You are not?
I will not be in support of it.
Thank you.
I don't have very much to add. I don't feel as strongly about this as I do the other graduation issue, but and I do think that the concerns about the space is valid, that the concerns that we heard from parents and extended family members. I do have concerns about some of our elderly family members and disabled people that are kind of sitting out in the hot sun on the lawn. And I do very much worry about inclement weather and what's going to happen in the event that there is rain. But based on what I've heard from the public, I guess that is a chance that people are willing to take. And I hope it doesn't ever go badly, but if it does, then that would probably be the point at which people will be more willing to reconsider the tradition. So at this point, with the information that we have and based on the information I've heard from other board members and the public, I won't support moving forward with the venue change.
Craig?
The only thing I really want to add to what Fred has said, which and what everybody has said so well, is that there are a whole host of issues with having it here at the high school, but I don't think we've really explored the issues with UIC, and my belief is that there will be a whole host of issues associated with transporting everybody to UIC, as you articulated some of them. So I am all for and supportive of keeping it here.
So I would echo, I was initially, when this first came up last week, I knew that it had been discussed, and I understand the urgency that we're facing if we do want to move this direction. And I understand the administration and the staff's, the challenge internally, but I think the bigger picture for the community and for the students and tradition, which is a double-edged word, I'm supportive. And one thing that I think a good thing to come out of this is the realization of some of these issues that we can address, to perhaps expand the seating, find ways to accommodate more families. And so, so for those reasons, I'm also in support of maintaining it here at OPRF.
I will just add that these are big decisions for our board and our community, and there is a lot of passion on both sides. And I am feeling that the need to err on the side of understanding that change is hard and too much change is disruptive. And I will say that my feelings about this are not, I'm not going to, I can't speak to living here for 45 years or having generations of family members be as a part of this community. And I'd like to hope that that is not the way that we establish who has a valid stake in the game. It is about our school community and doing what is best for our students, and through that lens is how I'm thinking about these decisions. I will say that I do think that we need more information. Just hearing tonight, I'm not sure that the same rules apply. Of course, if there's a graduation, you have a professional photographer, so it's not the same as a sporting event or some type of production. But, just thinking about logistics, I think more time is needed. I don't think it's a bad idea. I think that we give short shrift sometimes to what happens to asking folks, if it's 95 degrees, to sit outside, and particularly elderly and disabled. And speaking as someone with a chronic illness, the sun for me is damaging, and it takes 2 days to recover for me after sitting outside. But that's a choice that I have made and kind of reckoned with. I'm hoping to lobby a little bit earlier this year to, if you see me with an umbrella, everyone will know why. And it won't be because of rain, it'll be because of sun. And the last thing I want to say is, as we've talked about the 5 tickets and having 4 children that graduated from this high school, there are some that get more tickets. And, it is about being in the know and sometimes getting lucky and getting a ticket at the last minute. But to assume that everybody gets what they need or tough luck is a dichotomy that is false and something that does not sit well with me as we talk about this being an inclusive community. So I am erring on the side of wanting more information, but I think the consideration should be given to what it would mean to having a venue that would allow for families to not have to make a decision on who's there. And in terms of grandeur and tradition, our students are the focal point. So wherever our graduation is held, it will be majestic. And I don't want to lose sight of that as we talk about longstanding traditions. I want to keep our focus as a board on doing what's best for our students. But I think at this time that more information is needed, and to move forward at this point without exploring some of the other options that we've talked about would be short-sighted. And once again, we'll pray that it doesn't rain. So with that, we will call the vote.
Mr. Eisner?
Yes. I'm sorry, what's the question?
Yeah.
How's it rain?
Is it gonna rain?
Is it gonna rain? No. Sorry.
It's inevitable.
Mr. Barron?
No.
Ms. Cassell?
No.
Mr. Arkin?
No.
Mr. Kowski?
No.
Ms. Spivey?
No.
And Dr. Moore?
Reluctant, no. Okay. And now I move to approve the graduation attire recommendation as presented and ask for a second.
Second.
And I will open it up for questions and/or comments. Jennifer?
So I don't think it's a surprise that I'm in favor of moving forward with caps and gowns for our students. Just wanted to make a couple of comments. There's been some discussion among the board members in meetings in the past about why the board is deciding this. And I don't disagree that this probably actually is an administrative decision, but I do think at this point it's important for our board to take this on and be the leaders and advocates of this for a couple of reasons. I think we do set the vision for the school. We are called to do what's in the best interest of all of our students. And I think the strategic plan that we have approved and discussed many times is, of course, founded on this notion of equity. And this is our chance, once again, to speak up and say that we value equity above any antiquated traditions, which the word tradition I find to be a little bit of a loaded term. So this is about equity. It's about gender equity, it's about socioeconomic equity, and this is our chance to, once again, stand up for that. I also do think that it is very important that our students have a voice. We talk about that a lot here on this board, but I don't agree with this idea that the votes of some should dictate the rights of all of our students at all times, especially the students who are most vulnerable. And I also have some problem with the idea that we've made some accommodations to the dress code, and so that should be sufficient. To just say that if we make some changes, people should just take it and be happy with it, that doesn't, I don't agree with that. And I think even if I'm personally not affected by this, and my loved ones are not personally affected by this, I have enough empathy to understand what they're going through and put myself in their shoes. And I think that's, again, another reason for us as a board to take this on. It's important for us to show that we have that kind of leadership and empathy in our leadership. I thought the students had some really, really great ideas tonight about ways that we can make this tradition our own, whether it's decorating the caps, wearing the traditional garb under the gowns if a student chooses to, and take pictures. We can create new traditions. So of course I'll be voting in favor of moving forward with the caps and gown.
Oh, Fred?
Yeah, I'll start out by saying that, echo what Jen said at the beginning. I firmly believe that this is not board work. This is an administrative issue. Back in 2016, this item came to us as an informational item. We did not vote on it. I'm going to move that we table this. I think that it asks the administration to complete a process that is fair and equitable. and reflective of the desire of our senior class. I don't think all possible solutions have been vetted. I don't think the student's voice has been heard. I know that there was a meeting yesterday, a town hall meeting, but I think that the timing was problematic. It was at 5:30 in the afternoon where some kids were involved in activities. And it was also on a day where there were parent-teacher conferences. It was a non-school day, so there were a lot of kids that weren't in the building. I think I have a lot of confidence in our students, and I think that our students can come to pose the issues and pose the problems. I think that our students can come up with a very satisfactory solution to this dilemma. And I just think that we need more time, and I think that they need to be heard. I agree with the points that John Phelan made. I don't think I could say it any better. I think that the issues of financial hardship and the struggles that our non-binary students have can be addressed and resolved, and I'd just like to see more work done on it. Therefore, I make a motion that we table this.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
So are we still making comments on the first one?
Yes.
So relative to the first motion, I'm actually quite, I was of the opinion that this is not a board decision, because from my perspective, the board has already spoken on this matter of policy in terms of equity, in terms of gender equity. And I've been happy for it to be brought to the board. But I think that the decision here has got to be consistent with the other policies that we've put out there. And sometimes, you know, traditions are run crossways with some of those things that we want to change. But I'm actually very supportive of the caps and gowns.
So I would echo what Jen eloquently said, and back last year we made a big, or early this year, whenever it was spring, it's all blurring together, but on protecting those who are more vulnerable and speaking up for those who are in the minority. I know that there's a dilemma here in terms of process and in terms of tradition and student voice. As to Fred's motion to table, I've mixed emotions about whether to table this or whether to move forward with what we know is right, or I should say what we would agree to be the right move here. So I'm supportive of caps and gowns. I just feel like that's a pretty straightforward decision to be made. And as much as I respect the tradition that's been voiced, I think there's, like I said earlier, I think it's a double-edged situation, and sometimes people can, or traditions can unwittingly, and sometimes over time, become more aware of how they can cause harm. So that's where I stand.
So I seconded Fred's motion to table this discussion. I'm firmly of the opinion that this is not board work, and it should not become board work. And I'm leery of setting a precedent like this, because I think Craig is absolutely right. This is a matter of procedure, and we've already got policies in place that address this very issue. While I certainly am understanding of the folks who are advocating for maintaining the dress code, I am supportive of caps and gowns as well, for the reasons cited by Jen and others so eloquently. But I also would like to see if perhaps the administration could work with students a little bit, and I don't know what happened last night in that meeting. We weren't there, but see if there is some sort of compromise that would make our students feel included, but also feel heard at the same time, because we do have very differing opinions. I also wanted to say one thing about the recommendation. The administration's recommendations that we move to support the administrative recommendation. that irks me a little bit because I always support our administration. So it just, the wording of it, I also have a little bit of a problem with, because I don't, if this either gets tabled or whatever happens, I want to be clear, this is not a vote of no confidence in our administration, right? It's just not, that bugs me.
So, I also agree that this, this has not been board work, and we've put forth policy, and I think Amy Hill, kind of got my attention, because this is really a debate of tradition versus, social justice, and I think we've been pretty clear in our policy what it is, that we're supporting with social justice. So personally, I would be, I would be supportive of the caps and gowns because of that, but I don't agree that that's our vote. So.
This is my turn. I will start by saying that I appreciate I'm in agreement that, and we asked the question last week, why is this being brought to the board? This is administrative work. And we were given a response that it will bubble to the board regardless. And I think tonight is certainly an example of that. And so it was laid at our feet or at our hearts, however you want to look at it, to make a decision. And I share the frustration that it was brought to us because it is not allowed for even the communication to our students that this was a change that was being considered, and the reasons, which are compelling and necessary and speak to all the work that this district has done towards equity and social justice issues. And so I want to start by saying, I think it's clear the great pride and desire I have for our student voice and student leadership. And I think that the board has been put in a position to make a decision on something that is not our work, but here we are. And I'm not willing to, I don't think we as a board should kick the can or pass it back, but be very instructive in how we are not only talking about how we view our policy and our desire to move in that direction, but that our statement tonight solidifies this, and so there's no need for anyone to leave wondering what's going to happen. If it is in the interest of our students, and that is the lens I continue to look at these issues at, and I prepared a statement, and there's no need to read it. Earlier today, and in the last few days, and some sleepless nights, the questions that started bubbling up for me were ones of, I wonder, and this was, to Fred's data question, I wonder how many students have not participated in graduation because of being, uncomfortable or afraid that they were going to have a panic attack or not wanting to be outed. And I wondered how many students were too proud to say that they didn't have the money for graduation attire and didn't ask for help, but because of that did not participate and gave another reason. And those two questions alone for me showed why we have to be the voice for the minority of our students who would not win a popular vote. And I want to speak just briefly on even the aspect of voting. And I only have information from 2016, but when we've talked about let the students decide, that year there were 805 seniors. 442 of them participated in the survey on determining graduation attire. So as much as we're talking about student voice, 442 out of 805, 55% of the class. And I will tell you that year was the first year that students lobbied for caps and gowns in my tenure on the board, and were very organized in their approach. and went and asked how, can we do a survey? Can we poll the students? And were told by administration that it was a board matter, which was not true. So that responsibility was put on us, and there is some discomfort with change here. And we struggle with making change in a way that trying to keep everybody comfortable or everybody happy. And in this instance, if we are truly about the safety and security of our students, I think that we go with caps and gowns for all the reasons that have already been stated. And the initial vote that was taken in 2016, where the option of students being able to wear black or white, female or male, as opposed to dark for males and white for females, of those 442 students that voted, 184 voted for caps and gowns. And 134 voted for the dark suits, and 124 voted for the traditional white or dark attire. But there was another vote taken because the feeling that none of the votes garnered 50%. So we can play around with numbers and optics and surveys, but if we're really about equity for our students, I hope that we can understand that as much as tradition matters to a lot of people, our traditions for some of our most vulnerable students are damaging, and that's not what school is supposed to be about. And our graduation is our way of shining a light on the accomplishments of our students. And as much as our tradition has been, the tradition of moving your tassel over will be something that the classes, if we adopt this new procedure, will be something that will be, I'm sure, will have every family member and all of our students bursting with pride. And the picture that will appear on the cover of the Wednesday Journal of students throwing their caps in the air, I guarantee you, it will be just as beautiful as the red roses and the white and the dark. So I'm hoping that our board will move forward with the decision this evening, and that we return after this to the work of the board at the policy level.
I feel compelled to speak to clarify several things. One, it is true, this was potentially, and I'm saying potentially intentionally, the work of administration. However, as the superintendent, when we come forward with items that I believe that are as critical as this, to not have the board insert their voice in the decision or the direction. Support was not meant to be disrespectful. Perhaps we should have put the item as a discussion because we're asking for support. We didn't say approve. So maybe our wording was inappropriate. But, you know, in an email exchange with a board member said we need to give our community a voice in this. If the administration had come forward with a decision, and I think this board knows what my recommendation would have been, then my feel would have been, it would have been void of the community voice. It would have been void of the board's voice. And that we might be sitting here tonight saying, well, that was not brought before us, so we need to take a step back and have a discussion. So it was not meant to be disrespectful. It was not meant to put the board in a situation to have to vote. In our mind as an administration, it was respecting you as the board and respecting this community's voice, just as we did when we publicly came forward to present and talk about the procedures for our transgender, our non-binary, and our non-conforming students. Because administrative procedures are also done by the administration and do not require board approval. But because they were topics that we heard, we spent an hour, 2 hours almost, talking about this, and imagine. And for me, it all comes back to equity. And I know the board, so if the board wants to table it, so be it. If the board wants administration to make the decision, so be it. But I'm sure the board knows the decision that I will push for. It is not that we don't hear student voice. That is why we're here, because we hear student voice. And there are students who are suffering because of tradition. And I'm the first to say it is the most beautiful ceremony I've seen. So I'm going to say that. But I don't want anyone to leave thinking it was intentionally to spite any students who did not have voice. It was intended to give the voice to those who were not being heard. It was not intended to be disrespectful. And should we go back and have a conversation with students, that's okay too. But I felt compelled to say why this was brought forward. It was under our goal to improve and improve opportunities and access, and to remove those barriers that exist for our students. And I just felt the need to say that publicly, so that our intent was not misinterpreted, because it was not. It was to give voice.
Okay, so, we have an amendment to our motion to table, so we should vote on that prior to knowing if we need to vote on the attire.
Mr. Barron?
So there's still a motion to table?
Yes.
No.
Mr. Isley?
No.
Mr. Arkin?
Yes.
Mr. Kofsky?
No.
Ms. Spivey?
Yes.
Ms. Cassell?
No.
Dr. Moore?
No. So now we're back to our original. We've already moved and seconded it.
Yes, we have. So we'll take a vote. Thank you. Ms. Cassell?
Yes.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Mr. Isley?
Yes.
Mr. Arkin?
No.
Mr. Kofsky?
Yes.
Ms. Spivey?
Yes.
Dr. Moore?
Yes. Thank you.
On behalf of our students, thank you.
Okay.
Not gonna wear them. We're not gonna wear them.
Thank you very much, and I would ask you to be respectful of the work of the board. As we were respectful to you, please don't do this. This is not a Trump rally, and I will say that now. We are going to respect this work and be examples to our students. That's it. Okay, we are at our discussion items, and our first one is the tax efficiency report by David Pope. And I apologize, David, that you're coming into an atmosphere like this.
You want to come join me? That'd be fun. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm pleased to be able to be invited to be here. How do I do that? Push this way?
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. You can tell I don't come to these Hullett halls very often, so I appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here. Also want to extend my appreciation to all of you, Dr. Moore, Dr. Pruitt-Adams, and the entire board for your leadership. I know that a lot of the issues that you deal with are not easy, as reflected in some of the conversations that have been had so far this evening. And so the time that you spend while I reflect on the fact that sometimes it may appear thankless is actually greatly appreciated by so many people here in the community, so thank you for your time. I'm here to be able to have a conversation which, in light of the hour, I will attempt to make brief, but it relates to the report that was recently published and presented to the Village Board, the Taxing Bodies Efficiency Task Force final report. This is a report that was in response to a charge that a committee that was established as an ad hoc committee to look at taxation and the implications of decisions that have been made by all of the governing bodies in the community have had on the taxation levels here in our community over time, and what some sensible, thoughtful recommendations might be going forward. It's notable, I think, that the recommendations that are contained herein are not directed specifically at any single jurisdiction, but it's really a way to be able to think about the implications of the tax burden in the community as a whole, and how we can work in a coordinated fashion to be able to ensure that we're providing the greatest opportunity for all of the residents here in our community to be able to continue to live here in our community. So the committee itself was established and composed of 7 members. 2 of my colleagues are here tonight, John Hedges and Gary McCullough, who, if I say something wrong, I'm going to invite to come up here and grab me by the scruff of the neck and pull me away, and they can jump in and clarify things. And then we had a number of other members as well who were able to support the work of this effort. Joy Craigler, Judy Greffin, Brian Chang, and Jim Peters. So briefly, a few quick takeaways. The executive summary lays out the fact that the recommendations fall into 4 main categories: budget discipline, efficient delivery of governmental services, referenda discipline, and then education and information for the public and elected officials. The background calls out a few specific points that are sort of most challenging that relate to the overall level of increase in our community in taxes, and the fact that since 2000 we've significantly outpaced the rate of increase in inflation. So inflation since 2000 has increased by 43%, and the total Oak Park levy has increased by 139%. This does call out the specific levels of increase by each of the jurisdictions, but it's important to understand that there is some noise in that data because there are transfers that have occurred over that period of time between different jurisdictions. So it's really maybe a little bit less important to look specifically at single jurisdictions, the Park District being an example that during this period the village actually transferred responsibility for a significant portion of operating costs to the Park District, and so hence the village's levy responsibility related to the provision of those services would naturally or should have gone down, and the Park District should have gone up. So just, we could sort of take some of that out. We had similar situations between the village and District 97 related to, try to not get that pinging noise as much, between the village and District 97 related to about $4.5 million that the village provided in funding support, and also changes in the way that crossing guards were handled. Similar situation with District 200 and the construction of the high school garage. So there are those sorts of interfund transfers that occurred across the governing bodies. But if we collectively just look and see that we're outpacing inflation by 3 times over that period, that ends up being problematic. We also have one that looks simply at the municipality and shows that the village of Oak Park, in comparison to Berwyn, Elmwood Park, River Forest Park, is rising at a rate that is significantly higher than our surrounding communities. So if we look at the set of recommendations, which I want to sort of touch on briefly and then really give you an opportunity to be able to ask questions. The key ones have to do with maintaining budget discipline, and some examples there that are the ones that sort of get the highlights in the local press and are the ones that we should probably be thinking about most specifically are a recommendation that all of the jurisdictions maintain their, or limit their level of tax increase, and that's actual dollars, to inflation, meaning CPI or less, and to do that from now through 2030. And the idea is for every one of the jurisdictions to be able to live within that level of increase, so that we can take the trajectory of increase, which has been dramatically higher than CPI,
and level it out to CPI for the next 12 years, and give us an opportunity to be able to have the community catch up. The core rationale behind that is that the people who are actually being most negatively impacted are the people who are least equipped to be able to respond to the tax increases that have been occurring in the community. And that is individuals at the lower end of the income spectrum, both in the form of homeowners and in the form of renters, where these increases are being passed along and folks are being pushed out of the community. So I greatly appreciate the work that this board has done to put the view of issues being looked at through an equity lens as a priority. And I think that this speaks to that in critical ways, that individuals who are most vulnerable and most at risk are being put in a position where they are being forced out of the community and are not able to take advantage then of the types of services that we have at a wonderful institution like the high school. Some of the other core elements there include constraining salary growth and specifically setting total compensation packages, including all of the different components of that, at a level that is required to be able to attract and retain qualified employees, but not above that level. Also, in a similar respect, then publishing information regarding both the hiring and the attrition statistics for all full-time positions. I'll give you an example. When I was at the village, we had a situation where we had 2 openings for firefighters. And we put out a job description. We ended up with more than 400 people applying for those positions, and you know, a significant majority of them were qualified prospective firefighters. You know, part of that has to do with Oak Park being a wonderful place to work, but a part of that also has to do with the cumulative comp package that is available if you're a firefighter at Oak Park. And if we have 400 or 300 or 250 people who can perform a job at the level that we deem appropriate, you know, whatever that qualified level is, it may not be necessary to be providing 2.5% or 3 or 3.5% annual increases, both in terms of base pay and in terms of steps and lanes, for example, in the various ways that this gets calculated across the different jurisdictions, to be able to bring that person in and have them be hired and have them perform the job that we're asking them to do. There's also references to encouraging the prioritization of spending. This is something that obviously all the jurisdictions do through their budget processes, and the intent here is to be able to try to encourage the incorporation of additional information and be able to also feed that information back out to the community. Reducing excess fund balances. This is sort of a recognition of the fact that when jurisdictions in the environment that we live in Illinois under tax caps, you know, make the sort of logical decision to accumulate a certain fund balance and then to spend that down over time, that there are costs to doing that because the rate of return that can be obtained by those jurisdictions from investing those dollars are dramatically limited. And so, you know, if you take a jurisdiction that has X dollars, you know, over a period of time, and when they invest that, especially over the investment climate that we've seen over the course of the last 10 years and the limitations that exist under state law for how the jurisdictions can invest it, so they're investing it at, you know, 0.3 or 0.5%, when in fact, if that money had been left in the pockets of individuals in the community, it could grow pretty significantly through their own investment and then would be available for higher levels of contribution toward other projects and things that one might want to do at a later time. Utilize common assumptions and metrics for planning and budgeting purposes across all jurisdictions. This actually goes back to something that was initiated back in, I don't know, it's probably been 12 years now, the creation of an integrated, coordinated 5-year financial plan across all the jurisdictions, predicated on the idea that we would have a similar set of assumptions around things like EAV growth, CPI, reassessment values, so we can all begin to be on the same page across all the jurisdictions about what the implications of respective levy increases might be over time, and begin to see that more effectively. And then also establish a citizen-led village-wide financial oversight commission, which would be able to help pull together some of that information and then provide that information back in a reporting way to the jurisdictions and to the community at large. The other key areas are efficient delivery of governmental services, which is the specific point in there that was raised was the question of whether or not the community should consider the consolidation of jurisdictions in the event that that might generate or could generate savings and efficiencies. That's a question that is on the ballot this November, and we'll see what the reaction of the community is. If the community says no, then I suspect that that won't go anywhere. If the community says, yes, we think that should be considered if there were efficiencies, then my guess is the next step would be to conduct further study to be able to see whether those efficiencies would actually exist or not, and if so, what the magnitude of that might be, and then to make a more informed decision about whether or not to pursue that road that's contemplated. Referenda discipline is the point that I raised previously about refraining from running referenda through 2030. And then the last area is educate and inform voters and elected officials. This is really about helping to ensure that we have an informed electorate. I recall when I was village president, we went through any number of budget hearings, where we would have a cumulative budget, operations and capital in excess of $110 million, and we would have no one show up. And so people do show up for a lot of the issues that are very, things that go to sort of their immediate quality of life, or what they see as issues related to the character of the community, but they don't necessarily show up for a lot of the nuts and bolts dollar-related decisions. Although I will say this board has not had that experience. But the idea of being able to engage with the community in ways that can help people to understand the consequences of the overall spending decisions that are being made, I think is also something that's very important. So those are sort of the core areas. You have the report. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I do want to make sure that Gary and John and I are also equipped to be able to respond to any questions that you might have. And again, thank you so much for your time and for the important work that you do.
I'll open it up to questions.
Questions or comments?
Yes, however you'd like to.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the work of the task force and agree there's value in looking at things holistically. I know as a taxpayer, it isn't that I'm paying my tax bill to D97 and this, I get one tax bill. And actually, I grew up in a place where tax levies, there was one tax levy and it was distributed according to the different entities. We are a different functioning entity, so there's some merit to this. As I look at the recommendations, I think there's a lot in here that I feel is of value. I'm looking at, certainly budgetary discipline, prioritization. We've talked in my tenure about the need for standardization of the key measures, the indices, so that when you're setting projections, that you have that. So I think all of that is good. The one challenge I would say I have is, as a board here, and we're going to be talking levy in a few minutes, we've been on a strategy, and I've been since 2013, and we've been operating, since 2013, our taxes from this district have been held steady because of our fund balance. Our 2019 levy is flat with our 2013 levy, and if you look at the accumulation, we've foregone over $30-something million of potential tax increases, and saying now, with the plan for a referendum out in the early 2020s, now if you say, okay, now it's got to be 2030, well, that's a different game plan, and we've been operating. So we've got to figure out how to adjust. You can't just say, okay, you've been playing a game to go to, you've been holding your taxes, and now you've got to hold them through 2030. So there's adjustments that need to be made, but, and we've been operating under a strategy of trying to keep our taxes flat for a considerable period of time. Not low, but flat.
Right.
Okay?
You know, I was fortunate to be able to serve on the Finance Advisory Committee for this body in 2013, and you know, appreciate the work that the board has done since then. I think one of the rationales for the selection of 2030 is to try to somewhat break the habit that many of the jurisdictions are in, which is that idea of you know, increasing levies over a longer period of time at rates that significantly outpace CPI. So, and that tends to be driven by increases in spending that are outpacing CPI. So while the levy has been held flat since 2013, the spending in this jurisdiction, like most of the jurisdictions, has been increasing at a rate that significantly outpaces CPI. And as a result, you end up getting into a situation where at some point, you know, a decision gets put in front of the board and then also ultimately in front of voters to say, because of that decision to make those expenditure increases that are significantly outpacing CPI, we're going to need to either get a referendum or we're going to need to cut the following things. And those lists always tend to be the things that are sort of most significantly supported in the community. And it's a little bit of a game of chicken. And we're trying to back off of that game of chicken and get to the point where the actual increase in the spending line, independent of the levy, the increase in the spending line begins to track that CPI line. And that's something that I think all of the jurisdictions have some room where there could be some significant improvement. Agreed. Okay. And that's, and some of that, I mean, you know, if you look at, I mean, I gave the example of a firefighter. I think we could do the same thing for, you know, a teacher. We could do the same thing for a police officer. We could do the same thing for a public works employee in the community. That if you have an employee who's at, you know, $100,000 a year, he's going to retire at $135,000 a year. He's going to get a 75% pension on that, which is going to be $100,000 again, and that's going to be, say, a 20-year pension on a 34-year career. That when you actually do the math, and you add in the cost of healthcare benefits and retiree healthcare and everything that goes along with it, you're ending up with a comp package that's north of $250,000, $260,000 a year for every year worked. And then when you actually look at annualizing that, as if it's a 300 or a 230-day year instead of a 175-day year, that ends up being over $300,000 a year, which is where the collective package of benefits goes back to this point of, can we get people to take that job for the rate that it's at right now and not have to add in a 2% or 2.5% or 3% or 3.5% increase? And if the answer is no, and people leave, then you're actually hiring new people in under a completely different pension system, which has a much lower cost structure associated with it. You don't want to lose people because they're good folks. And if they want to keep working, you want to be able to have those types of folks here. But if a 2% increase in the last 4 or 5 years of your career is going to make that much of a difference, you know, when there are people clawing at the door to be able to take those types of jobs, you know, I think those are the sorts of hard questions that need to be asked across all of the jurisdictions. Because they're the sort of hard questions that right now, average Oak Parkers are facing about whether or not they can afford to remain in the community.
Just a couple comments. So I agree in concept with exactly what you're talking about. even as you mentioned in the report, in practice, that would be painful.
Very painful.
And, and how to thread the needle between managing the momentum of the types of goals and things we want to achieve in the school at the same time as managing that issue is difficult, and is certainly something on the mind of this board on a consistent basis. But actually, to go back to one other point, I know that you were pointing out expense growth, and while I know that we can do better at expense growth, I quickly went through our expense numbers because I thought this would come up. And since 2014, and I'm sure some people in the audience will correct me on this if I'm wrong, I have us growing at about 3% in terms of expense growth, not something much bigger, which tends to get reported.
Right.
And that's extracting debt service, which our debt service has been going down to 0. If you don't extract the debt service, it's been 1%. So, as Tom said, I'm just reinforcing the fact that we've been on this for a while and really trying to do a good job at it. For us to go from 2005, 2006, 25 years to 2030 without a referendum seems a little bit drastic in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. I understand the intent, but at the detail, I'm a little concerned with how do we support that.
And I hear what you're saying exactly. I think that's really important. I think if we can look at it more so through that lens of sort of what real supply and real demand is, then we're going to be able to get a better handle on how much latitude we've got on the expense side. Because right now, for many of the jurisdictions, the real supply of labor to be able to perform the jobs that we're asking people to perform is more plentiful at the pay rates that we're at than would necessitate the levels of increase. And so, I mean, I do think that this board ends up, unfortunately, sort of paying for some of the decisions that have been made in prior years. I think that you mentioned the 2005 phase-in, and that decision to do the phase-in then coupled very closely thereafter with the increase that was negotiated into the next contract of 5% annual increases for 5 years. When you add in steps and lanes, it becomes more like 8. That dramatically increased the base. And now the question is, once that dramatic increase in the base is there, how much is it going to continue to sort of extend? And that really ought to be influenced by this understanding of what the relative level of supply and demand is as it relates to labor rates.
Understood.
Right.
Yeah. Hi. I want to thank you for the work that you've done. I enjoyed going through it. I've got like 2 pages of questions, but I won't ask you. Maybe what
you can send those to us. We'd be happy to just sit down and have a chat.
But let me just ask a couple of questions. The first is, I agree with you on constraining costs, all right, in expense growth. I mean, that's the key. We know that. All right. We also know that the majority of our costs are related to human resources.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's not just you,
right.
It's all the jurisdictions. So.
Okay, and we know that, and we know, and we've been talking about as a board, we can't say a lot because we're involved in the contract negotiation,
sure.
but we're there and we know it. I think that, and I'd like to hear at a later date how your research and how you got to this report. I will say that I am an anecdotal person on a very data-driven board. Okay. All right, and I want to thank Dr. Moore for pushing me in that direction of appreciating data. But let me narrow this down to two questions. The first is, your position on our fund balance, all right?
I don't think we have a position on your fund balance in,
Well,
we have a position on fund balances in general.
Okay,
Yeah.
but we're the 900-pound gorilla in that room, right? So, in here, there's one point on page 8 where you talk about spreading capital improvements through the over the life of the capital improvements, the cost over the life of the capital improvements with the use of debt. Okay, so as you know, we're gonna get a report in November on the Imagine program, and there'll be some, the ask for some capital improvements. So I would ask what your advice would be in terms of how those improvements should be funded. Should they be funded from our reserve? Should they be funded with debt? Should they be funded with a balance somewhere in the middle of the two?
Yeah, so I think they're sort of whispering behind me. It depends a little bit on sort of what the which improvements and what the nature of it is.
Right.
But I'll the 2013 Finance Advisory Committee actually wrestled with this issue somewhat, and I don't think my perspective has changed very much on it. The question of what portion of that fund balance is available based on current commitments that you've already made on the operating side is, I think, a reasonable question to ask. But assuming that there is some additional portion that is not yet committed as a result of existing contracts, and given the fact that you're in the middle of negotiating one, I'm guessing that you've got certain assumptions about potential rates of change, but that may not be finalized at this point. Let's assume that there is some measure of the fund balance that could potentially be made available for capital investment. From as I sort of think about it, that fund balance was able to be built up based on tax contributions from individuals who are in the community currently and have been in the community over the course of the last X number of years. I would be concerned about the idea of significantly increasing debt obligations that would add to further tax burden in the near term if the intent was to still preserve fund balances at a significant level. And what I mean by that is having already taken the money from a group of people who are in the community today, if we attempt to take yet more money from that same group of people who are in the community today to be able to pay for improvements that could be paid for by paying down the fund balance and the dollars that have already been spent, or that have already been collected but have not yet been spent, it would seem to be potentially negatively impacting those folks who have already made those contributions in a way that would be harmful to them. If alternatively, the choice was to give some of that money back, which I know this board has, in essence, sort of done by not taking the levels of increase that it could have taken conceivably under the law, that there has been some measure of response from this board to the fact that that fund balance was built up sort of on the backs of folks who have, who are still in the community. I would just be concerned, and we actually had this discussion at the village board table when I was in office, that if we had a fund balance that was significant, and then we put additional debt on folks, and we were going to go and tax them for it, and that fund balance was above levels that were necessary to be able to meet, the objectives that we had, that would be exceeding the demands that we should be making on taxpayers. So I guess my short answer is, I would use a significant portion of the fund balance, of the available fund balance, and I think that's the part that's important to define. What is the portion of the fund balance that would in fact be available? I don't know the answer to that. You all are going to be much better equipped to know the answer to that based on what your operating assumptions are going forward. But I would want to use that first before then putting more responsibility on current existing taxpayers.
Okay, thank you. One last question from me. If you we're not the only community communities in this issue. I mean, the property tax rates all over the state of Illinois are hurting everyone. So I ask, what have you done any work, or would you suggest any work around the community to direct our lawmakers to provide adequate funding of school districts and help us reduce costs by other means such as prevailing wages, etc. In 2003, we received a roughly 12% of our revenue from state aid.
Right.
All right. In 2019, you'll see in a few minutes we're going to get about 5%. All right. Our Illinois state constitution states in Article 10, Section 1, that the state has the primary responsibility for financing the system of public education. All right. With the law that was passed, which provides for evidence-based funding, it's basically because of our adequacy factors, we are going to be frozen for some time in terms of state obligations. So my question is, how do we get our lawmakers in the state of Illinois, all right, to quit pushing those dominoes over into the local governments? Because the other things that are on, and I think you've mentioned the possibility of a pension shift to local communities. How do we get that to stop?
David, before you answer, I'm sorry, I'm going to just say that this, in my opinion, if you could give us the Cliff Notes version of the answer, because I think that the questions that Fred raises about the policy and the law aspects of this are perhaps better served from an educational standpoint with our with IGov and with our tri-board. So the question is compelling and necessary, but the other things we have to do tonight, if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the Taxing Bodies Efficiency Task Force supports the idea that when the state of Illinois says that it should be the primary funder of education, that it should in fact be the primary funder of education. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about that. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about policy advocacy. But I do think that we spent time talking about education. Education includes the element that you just raised, which is an important component. The fact that the state has not done that is part of what contributes to the challenges that we face. But really, most of the challenge that we face collectively as a community is driven by our own decisions that are within our own control. So in 2000, an average household paid about 5% of its income toward its property tax burden. Now, it pays over 8.4% of its income toward its property tax burden. And when you factor that into, with the decisions that were made at the federal level regarding the change in deductibility of state and local taxes, that burden actually rises collectively above 10%. So on the dollar amounts that are available to people in our community to be able to pay taxes, it is a much larger bite of income that's required to be able to meet these obligations. And so I don't necessarily put a lot of stock in Springfield being able to figure things out anytime soon. And so I think that the intent of this report is to say, what can we do here locally to be able to acknowledge and recognize the challenge that is being created here, especially for individuals in the bottom 1, 2, and 3 quintiles, income quintiles, and how can we, as a collective set of governing bodies, work to be able to reduce that, that challenge in the future.
I just want to make a few really brief remarks, no questions at all. Thank you to the entire task force. I know that there's a lot of effort that went into this, and to boil it down and then to give us an expanded version. And so there's a lot here that helps provide historical context. That's really helpful for a lot of newer elected folks as well as those who are going to come on board, so very helpful resource. So thank you. And we have later discussion that I'll be able to elaborate on some of the points that this brings to light, so I appreciate all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would encourage you, if there are other questions that.
Absolutely.
Certainly, I have a few, but I'm not going to ask them.
That's great. Okay. Thank you all so much for all of your work. Really appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next item is the levy options. And presenting this option is, this report is Dr. Robert Grosser, our consultant, and Cindy Stador, interim business manager. This item is in compliance with Strategic Plan Goal 6, Strategy 3, and Board Policy 4:20, 4:40, and 4:1.
Make this presentation brief. The purpose of tonight, as it relates to the levy, is to provide two options as a process of consideration as the board considers the levy. The tentative levy will be discussed in November, and the final levy will be approved in December. So what I'd like to show the Board of Education, is it up on there? Are they able to see it also? Is two options. There's obviously many options in between these options, but I'm basically showing the Board of Education two options. For the 2017 tax levy, tax extension, the total extension was $66,657,000. And the breakdown by fund is on that spreadsheet. The two levy proposals, the first one is a zero increase levy proposal, where the aggregate total extension would end up being the same number, $66,657,000. There were some adjustments that were made amongst the funds, and I'd like to go through those for a second. First of all, the Board of Education had an extension of $500,000 last year in the Life Safety Fund. My recommendation would be to move that $500,000 into the Operations and Maintenance Fund. It could still be used for life safety work, but it gives you greater flexibility with that money. So the money could be used for capital projects, but those capital projects can or don't have, they could be or not affiliated with a life safety amendment. So that would give you greater flexibility with that money. And then the second movement would be to take the Liability Insurance Fund, $1 million tax extension, that's the tort fund, and move that into the Education Fund for a couple reasons. First of all, the tort fund has very healthy fund balance reserves right now. And secondly, generally speaking, it's the preferred, the preferred method of charging a lot of expenses that a lot of school districts charge to the tort fund is to more accurately charge into the Education Fund. So the education's a pure fund as it relates to some of those expenses. There's some discrepancy on what's considered risk management, what's not considered risk management. So it's since you could charge the same expenditures in the Education Fund, it just seems advisable to move that money into the Education Fund. Both moves would give the district greater flexibility. You'd still be able to spend the money on those exact same things if you want to, but if you don't want to, you could spend it on other things. The second option is to provide for a 2.1% increase. That's what the Consumer Price Index was in 2017, and that would be the maximum increase the district could incur. They would be able to get a little bit more money for new property, but the base increase could be 2.1%. And if the board approved a 2.1% tax levy increase, my suggestion would be that additional money be placed into the Education Fund, with all the other funds staying the same. This is a historical increase of CPI since tax caps came into play in the early 1990s. Again, this will be the second year in a row at 2.1%. Over this time period, the average is about 2.27%, so this is a little bit lower than average, but it's certainly higher than it was for the 4 years prior to last year. The purpose of this slide is that, as you know, 81% of your money comes from real estate taxes. So whereas other school districts, maybe it's 20 or 30%. Because 81% of your money comes from real estate taxes, the decision you make on the tax levy is going to almost exclusively drive all your revenues. The point that was brought up by one of the board members just a few minutes ago was I think Fred brought it up, that the evidence-based funding model is going to result in your state revenues not increasing. Your federal revenues will have very little increase, more than likely. So any revenue growth the district would receive would be in the form of real estate taxes. The schools that rely on state money are seeing big increases because of evidence-based funding. Districts like Oak Park, River Forest do not see increases. As far as
Does that mean that all the growth that we see in students or in expenses have to be absorbed by us and there's no additional funding anymore?
That's exactly right.
So if we have 10% growth in students, we just have to find 10% someplace to pay for
either an
all that.
increase in the tax levy or fund balance reserves.
Thank you.
So obviously with option 1, the impact would be 0, so this is just the impact of option 2. It's estimated that if the board passes option 2, the estimated new money that the district would receive would be about $1,456,000. Of that amount, it's estimated that $77,000 will come from new taxable property. I'm estimating that the district's going to have about $2.5 million in new taxable property, and it's just based off of trends over the last couple of years. And it's estimated that the tax increase to the homeowner with a $400,000 market value home, as listed on the tax bill, and that's an important point because it's calculated off the tax bill. Generally speaking, your true value of your home is higher than what the county says on the tax bill. So on the tax bill, $400,000 market value home will be $68. The rule of thumb, this is kind of good to know for the Board of Education. The general rule of thumb for this school district is that every $1 million of tax increase is about $50 for a $400,000 homeowner. That's the general rule of thumb. This has been, as Tom was pointing out, this is the tax extension of the district from 2011 to 2017. And you can see it has a very unique pattern where the district under-levied a bit in 2012, significantly under-levied in 2013-14, brought it back up closer to its adjusted amount. It was never able to capture what it lost completely, and then has increased modestly over the last 2 years, mostly because of new property. But because of the decrease, which produced deficits in excess of $10 million in each of those years, the district ended up using about $29.5 million of fund balance reserves to cover those deficits. Compared to what the potential growth this district could have had they captured their full CPI, like many school districts do, most school districts, the district left about under-levied about $32.2 million less than it was entitled to under tax caps. And so comparing, so while there certainly has been an increase, if you look at if you factor out the decrease of $31.2 million and compare to the 2011 tax year to the 2017 tax year, the Village of Oak Park, their tax extension increased $10.3 million during that period, which is a 45.5% increase. Oak Park Elementary 97 increased by $16.9 million, which was an aggregate increase of 29.45. Oak Park High School increased by $515,000, which was a 0.8% aggregate increase over that entire period. So that's so again, those are the two options that we presented. Certainly, there's options in the middle, and obviously, and as I will mention in the presentation on the funding of Imagine, this decision will obviously have an impact on that decision as well.
And Rob, I just want to, and Cindy, for the purposes of tonight, this is a discussion item, and can you just go through and remind of when the board has to present the initial and then the...
So at least 20 days before the board approves the final tax levy, the board has to prepare a tentative levy. So the theory is that at the November board meeting, the board would, some districts do it differently. Some districts approve the tentative levy, some districts present the tentative levy. So I would go whatever you do with past practice. But you would do that in November, and then in December, the Board of Education would approve the final levy. And then it has to be filed at the county the last Tuesday of the month of December.
But one clarifying question on that is, it is my understanding that the tentative must be, I gotta get my words right, higher than, the final cannot be higher than the tentative, is that correct?
I'm not aware of that.
That's how we have understood it in the past, that...
I don't believe that's the case, but I could certainly find out and find out what's in it.
That's the game.
I've never heard that, but again, that doesn't mean that that's not the case.
Okay.
I mean, the only law I know as far as the increase is that if you are proposing an increase in excess of 5%, then you have to post a notice in the paper and hold a public hearing.
That,
Right.
but it's more just the relationship between what is initially or tentatively proposed versus, once you've done that, what you are allowed to do beyond that. That would be important to understand.
Yes.
Yes, we'll have that in.
Thank you.
Fred,
I'm sorry, Matt.
Sure, I'll just, so Rob, you mentioned that we could go with either one, I mean, we have different options, these are the two scenarios. I appreciate that we have two. I know last year, I think we just had one proposed, and then we actually ended up going lower, because we were under the understanding at that time that we couldn't go higher, we could go lower. But isn't it also true we could actually go lower, we could actually abate this year? Are we still eligible to do that?
Sure.
Okay. And so that's the one thing that, you know, I know that's not been something that we've really discussed as a board in any earnest way, and that's another option. I mean, we have well in excess of what we ought to have based on, you know, the parameters of what's recommended. And so we had over 130 million at one point, with 107 million now. Getting back to that, if we've abated 32 million, and we've been roughly, does that mean we get close to 140 million at one point?
No, it's just that during that period you ran some surpluses after those other time periods, which helped regenerate a little bit of it back.
So anyway, so I'll just signal to my fellow board members that my inclination is to go for the most, have a zero change, because we have so much money that's been in this bank for so long that really ought not to have been there in the first place. And I know that we have other spending, some significant spending coming up, but there's a serious trust issue in this community, and that would be one way to acknowledge the pain that people are feeling and just what is right. There's what's legal and there's what's right. I know someone who had a bank that took money every month out of this person's account for a dozen years, a couple $1,000, and ultimately, by law, the bank did not have to return more than just like 3 months worth. But so by law versus what's right.
And I guess my own, and I'll be bringing this up, but you know, I feel like my goal is always to give as much information as possible so the board makes a well-informed decision. You do have to recognize, given the fact that the district is essentially a balanced budget now, that if we do have a zero revenue growth scenario and expenditures grow at any level, then there will be deficit spending, and so that's the balance that would happen with a freeze.
You talked about new construction coming online in option 2, and you've estimated it, I think you used $2.5 million in value, estimated about $77,000 that would equate to $77,000 in revenue. Is there a way to get a better estimate? I mean, can we go to the assessor and get an idea? You know, we know that in Oak Park we've had some large projects. We don't know when they come online.
Sure. I mean, there is, you could look at permits and things like that. Some of it has to do with when it hits the tax rolls. So that's not completely a reliable thing, because sometimes it might hit the following year. But I will say another general rule of thumb to know. I think there's a couple of things that is that for every $1 million of new property, you get about $30,000, because your tax rate's about $3.
But
so that's not. I mean, it doesn't have a huge. I mean, so if it was $5 million, it'd be $150 million. If it's $2 million, it's 60. I mean, it's real money for sure. But because again, just because it was 30,000 per million, if you look at the historical, other than like if the TIF comes off the books or something like that, generally speaking, there's not huge things. But I think that's something that we looked into for sure.
No, I'm just asking if there's a way that we can narrow our focus to get a more accurate number.
We
could
check with the buildings.
The second question I have, it has to do with loss costs. Because I believe last year we did take loss costs and new construction and forego the CPI, foregoing the CPI. Can you explain a little bit what loss cost is and how that gets?
Sure. So the default loss cost in Cook County is 3% for non-bond funds and 5% for bond funds. Your district's debt-free, so you don't have a tax levy for bonds. So the default increase that the county would add to the tax levy would be 3%, but it doesn't get you any more money. So if you were at 2.1%, hypothetically, you wouldn't get 2.1% plus 3%. It wouldn't get you any more money. Before tax caps were in place, that loss cost had a more relevant picture. But the relevancy of the loss cost, as you're considering these scenarios, is that if the Board of Education wanted a hard freeze, then it should pass a resolution to not increase the levy and pass a resolution to have a zero loss cost factor. There are some districts that I know that have portrayed that they're freezing their tax levy, but they kept the loss cost factor in, which made them eligible to receive 3% more, so they got the max even though they had the perception that it was a freeze, which I don't think is right.
I don't see any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item is the update on Imagine. This item is for information.
All right, thank you. My name is Rick Young. I'm with Perkins & Will, and so I'm going to be giving you an update on the documents you received from Imagine. You received a series of documents. First among that was a narrative document that just described the intent and purpose of each of those documents. So you could go through and realize exactly what each of the components were trying to say. So I'm not going to go through that specifically, but go to the documents themselves. The first of which is this flowchart. And the intent of this flowchart is feedback we received both from the board as well as the community members in both the board workshop and the most recent Imagine group. Community presentation was a little bit more understanding of what was included in the facilities master plan. Previously, the master plan has been presented as a series of 5 sequences that could be implemented over time. And I think the perception was that these were all had to be done completely as a solid set of sequence. And we had explained that there is actually flexibility in the master plan that was intended to give the board the flexibility to choose when and how they implemented certain elements of the master plan. And so what this document does is it breaks it down into its more smaller bits of components, which can be implemented as separate discrete projects, but it also gives the relative relationship of how those components are affected by other components. So if you look at this document, you will see each of the components are given a letter designation. And then underneath that is a brief description of what's included in that component, as well as the overall component cost. And again, that is a project cost, that is not a construction cost, so that takes into account all the associated fees and other soft or indirect costs that might be associated with that project. It also gives an estimated duration of the construction of that component. We'll get into the detail of what's included in each component in the second document, but I'm going to continue to explain all the elements of this document first. So underneath some of the components, you will see lines and arrows that point to other components, and what that's intended to represent is that the component at the start of that line is needed to be implemented in order for the other component to be implemented. It either has implications on where it's located within the building or construction sequencing and logistics. I do have all the 5 sequences broken down there, and those represent all the components that were in the original sequence and the original costs that were presented. So the overall, pardon me? The overall combined cost for the sequence is listed up at the top, just for ease of reference. Down at the bottom, the components that are listed at the bottom of the page, everything below the dashed line, those are components that can be executed as discrete elements that really have no implication or requirements or connection to other components. So, for instance, components P1 through 4, those are renovation of existing classrooms. You don't have to vacate classrooms in order to renovate them. They can just be renovated in place. They're listed as P1 through 4 because we isolated them into a series of 4 components because you wouldn't renovate all, I think it's 64 classrooms in a single summer. So in order to do that over a series of summers and to give you the flexibility about how you want to execute them, that's why they're separated, but they're grouped for the ease of reading in this document. There's also a series of notes, in different colors. The red are generally things that we just want to call your attention to specifically, either notes explaining things that changed. For instance, sequence 1 and 2, there's an asterisk next to there. And going back and reviewing these in more detail, we found there was one line item that was inadvertently put in sequence 1 that was intended to be in sequence 2. So that was just a correction that was made. Another item is in sequence 4. In further discussions with Building and Grounds, we identified a component that we had in the master plan that Building and Grounds already intended to renovate in the next summer or 2, so it wasn't relevant to include in the master plan because it's already scheduled to be done. That's specifically the interior stadium renovations. Just a couple other items in different colors. We've highlighted all the green roofs that are associated with various additions. Those are all highlighted in green. And then underneath those, we have parenthetically put that you could investigate doing solar panels in lieu of green roofs. And there's been some debate about what would be more desirable, especially in light of information that the Park District has engaged in a agreement with their service provider, that service provider both installed and maintains the solar panels for them, so relatively no cost for the Park District to have those. So that is something that the district could investigate further if they didn't want to do the green roofs, but the green roof price tag, because that was the initial investigation, is included there. So I'm going to go ahead and reference the other document because I don't think it requires quite as much explanation. Then feel free to take questions. But if you do have a question, feel free to ask. The second document is meant to work in conjunction with that flowchart, and this just gives you a spatial location for each of the components throughout the building. For those of you not necessarily familiar with an Axon document like this, basically think about if you were up in the air looking down at the building, and then you sliced each of the floors and then separated them. That's exactly what you're looking at here. So each of the floor levels, from the lower level at the bottom all the way up here to the 4th floor at the top, that's just the floor cut in half so that you can see where the components exist within the building. And then each of the components are bound by a dashed line because there are individual elements in each of the components. And those components are grouped together based on construction logistics, similar project types, and other things of that nature that would require them to be executed at the same time. And then in the margins under each of the components, it actually lists out each of the individual spaces that are included there, and then the associated letter designations. So you can compare this directly back to that flow chart. And then the last set of documents that were provided to the board were updated detailed cost estimate documents, and those are broken down several different ways. The first set of summaries is based on the sequence and phase. So each sequence can have multiple phases, and then it lists the component letters in the left-hand column with a series of other information, including the square foot area, the estimated duration, and the construction costs. And there is an overall summary that categorizes by space type designation. And then there's also a detailed listing that groups it together by those components. So if you go up into this, it lists component C, and the different elements of component C are listed there. And then you go down, it provides the detail as to how those costs were put together. So those were the documents that were provided to the board. Really the intention of providing this information was to, I know Jackie, I believe you specifically at the workshop had mentioned, it'd be really useful for the board to understand how the various components relate to each other and what flexibility the board has in implementing the various recommendations of the master plan. And that's what this document is meant to give the board, an understanding of, if we decide we want to, prioritize something ahead of what the Imagine team has recommended, this allows you to understand what other components are affected by moving things forward or back in that manner.
Great.
I just had a couple quick questions on this. So first of all, thank you for this set of documents. I love this flow chart, but I'm an engineer, and that's a sad commentary. And I really think the detail behind it, the way you've broken it out, makes it really easy to understand in terms of how to break the project up. So I appreciate that. I had a couple quick questions on the flow chart. And I'm sorry, that's going to go right into detail. In sequence 4, there is an arrow that points down.
Correct.
What's it pointing at?
It's pointing at component F. That's really just, there's so much information trying to be communicated, and to fit it all into one sheet, just graphically, things had to be where they were. So you will see it's going from components I and F. There's a portion of F that's in sequence 3, and that goes over, and then it points down. So in order for the bulk of component F to be executed, you need to have that components I and F executed first. However, you move on to sequence 5, I and F have to be executed in order for components B and C to be executed. And the relationship there is those components all deal with the commons, and then also the commons therefore relates to the main entrance, and that's the relationship between these.
And just one more question. I have a bunch of detailed questions on this. I think I'll just email those and get some answers. But one generic one. So there are green roofs all over the page. Is the green roof cost an incremental cost? Meaning we have to build a roof, right? So is the green roof, the cost of the roof embedded in the green roof?
I know what you're getting at, and the green roof cost that's identified is above and beyond what it would be to install
it's the incremental above just putting a roof on the building?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason that the green roofs are kind of peppered throughout, we identified areas that we were building a new roof or an area that there was an opportunity for that sort of sustainable installation. So if the board so chose, we wanted to arm you with the information that this is the estimated cost to go above and beyond just putting a roof over the area.
And I don't want to get too deep into the green roof issue, but is there a cost benefit to the green roof, or is it just an environmental way to manage water better?
It's both. There is a cost benefit. Over the years, stormwater is becoming an increasingly obvious issue for the metropolitan area, and counties have been implementing stricter and stricter measures about how properties handle their stormwater, such that anytime you do a new addition, you have to meet the new requirements for managing that stormwater. It started with you had to slow the release of stormwater into the storm sewer system. The next step is you have to maintain so much stormwater on your site, and you can only release a certain percentage in the stormwater system. So the green roof helps with those costs, and the costs associated with those stormwater measures that are incrementally being increased by the county will help mitigate the otherwise costs that you would have to do to manage stormwater. So the cost for the green roofs as it is now is more related to the increased cost it would be install a green roof at the current time in our understanding of what those requirements are from counties. However, with the expectation that those would increase, that number is going to become closer and closer to the actual cost just to do the addition.
So it's in there now to offset future costs in essentially water removal. Is that?
Yes, it's
okay.
to manage the water on your site rather than overburdening the municipal storm sewer system.
Okay, but it's fair to say right now we're burdening the storm sewer system with that amount of water.
Yes.
Okay, and I just wanted to know where we were and what, how to think about that. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't install the green roof, you would have to do other measures to manage the storm water coming off of your site if you were to do, say, an addition. You would be required to, there are calculations, but you would be required to mitigate your burden on the storm sewer system in some manner. If not the green roof, then there would be some other manner that you would have to implement.
This is very much appreciated, and the fact that Craig is excited as an engineer, and I understand it as a non-engineer, speaks to how well I think it's done. And I just want to say that as we're moving into our town hall to get more community input, and then being presented with the final proposal between those times will be when the board can, ask additional questions, and also if we can start thinking, individually what we want to discuss after listening on Tuesday for priorities and things like that. And I think this document helps us to be able to do that, so that's very much appreciated. Are there any questions?
I just wanted to comment that I was remiss in saying this was presented by Rick Young from PUW and is in compliance with Strategic Plan Goal 6, Strategy 3.
Thank you.
The next item is the update on potential funding for facilities recommendation. This item is meant for information, for board discussion. No action is required. It is in compliance with Strategic Plan Goal 6, Strategy 3, Board Policy 4:20, 4:40, and 4:150.
Good morning, everybody.
Says it's 8:30.
So as the Board of Education's gathering data for their, for obviously this very significant decision as it relates to capital work in the school district over the next many years, you're getting data on capital and different projects and different recommended sequences, and you're getting, and my kind of focus is the decisions as it relates to the financing of the projects, and maybe to determine how you want to finance or how do you want to pay for portions of the Imagine plan. So I just want to kind of briefly go through. Is it set? Oh. I'll begin for the sake of time, but so the Board of Education is going to be receiving a comprehensive list of capital improvement recommendations from the Imagine team, as well as some recommended sequencing of the conceptual plan with consideration to need, efficiency, and ordering as it relates to construction constraints. The decision process is kind of the way I see it, is that there's the first decision that comes after the Imagine plan is kind of determining your capital commitment. How much money are you willing to commit at this point in time as it relates to the plan? And then identify the projects within the plan, with consideration from the recommendation from the committee on which projects you're going to address. Then at some point down the road, when that is complete, more than likely, then I visualize that the district will have some sort of master facility plan that will incorporate whatever remaining items the Board of Education wants to have on their, I think it's my cell phone. Whatever parts of the plan that would still exist at that point in time, and other major capital projects that are necessary in the facilities. Then the district would be assessing its financial condition again at that point in time, determine if there's available capital commitment, just as they're doing the first time, and if there's not enough capital commitment to address the projects they want to address, then at that point in time, they would have to pursue taxpayer referendum to generate the resources necessary to go to the next stage. So the first thing we look at as far as current capital commitment, and that the Board of Education is going to be considering, is how much, if any, of the fund balance reserves that they want to utilize for the capital for the plan. And right now, as was mentioned, the district has approximately $107 million. The audit's not complete, but it's somewhere around that level, and that represents about 15 months worth of fund balance reserves. Board Policy 420 has fund balances targeted at between 25% and 75%, which means that if the board wants to go bring fund balances down to that range, they could utilize between $42 and $84 million worth of fund balance reserves towards the plan if they so desire. In making that decision, however, there's other decisions that have to go hand in hand with this. There's issues that are within the control of the Board of Education. One of them, which is what we just discussed, is the Board of Education committed to balanced budgets? Is the Board of Education going to take the position that they're going to purposefully run deficit budgets and utilize fund balance reserves to cover that? Because if fund balance reserves are used to cover deficit spending, then there's less fund balance reserves available to address capital projects. That's the main driver of your revenue, as was mentioned. Your decisions on the levy will drive your revenues. And your main driver of expenditure growth is the collective bargaining agreements, which I'm not aware, I'm not aware either of the specific details of the agreement, but certainly this agreement and subsequent agreements is the major driver of your expenditures. And then you also have to consider issues outside the Board of Education. that you can't control. These are things such as the state shifting of pension burden to school districts. One of the candidates for governors has stated that the way to address it is to shift it to schools, and it would phase it in over 4 years. If it is phased in over 4 years, and it maxes out at what's projected to be around 9% of credible earnings, your expenses automatically grow $3 million a year. So just so you could go from balanced budget to $3 million deficits immediately. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's certainly a possibility and something that you at least have to have on your radar and consider as you determine how low you want to bring fund balance reserves. And then the second major thing that I see as far as legislation is the property tax freeze, which has been presented the last couple of years, never passed. It's passed out of I think it passed out of the Senate, not the House, one or the other, but it never made it all the way through. But if that does happen, then whether the Board of Education wants to increase at CPI or not, they wouldn't be able to. And that would take away potential growth in your revenues. This chart is kind of relevant as it relates to this decision and your tax levy decision. And I just made a simple example. Your district basically has balanced budgets right now. 82 million in revenues, 82 in expenses, approximately. So this is just a hypothetical example of the Board of Education not increasing the revenues. So if the revenues were flat at 82 and expenditures grew at a 2% rate, which potentially is a conservative rate. You know, again, I don't know the collective bargaining settlement or where it's going to end up. I guess nobody knows that. But you do have some expenditures like special education that have been growing significantly as well. But let's just assume that the district can keep expenditure growth at 2%, about inflation. What would happen is over 5 years, just mathematically, your fund balance reserves will be decreased by $25 million, and you'll be running an $8.5 million deficit in 5 years. That's just mathematically what would happen. If your expenditures grow 2% a year, your revenues don't grow at all. Now, 5 years from now, you would say, okay, we could afford $25 million in fund balance reserves, and I would agree with that. But I also would make the statement that it would be difficult to say that you could live with 8.5, you can't sustain deficits of that magnitude in perpetuity. So the magnitude of the deficits to me is more relevant than the sucking down of fund balance reserves. So this is a decision that the Board of Education has to consider as it's deciding on the Imagine project as well. So if the Board of Education decides to commit to a balanced budget, then it has $42 to $84 million worth of fund balance reserves that it could, if it so desired, allocate towards the project. If the Board of Education decides not to commit to the balanced budgets and has structured deficits similar to what was projected, then then they have to decide whether they want to use any fund balance reserves. I mean, there may be some that could be used, but certainly the amount of money of reserves that could be used for capital projects would be decreased significantly, because you sure don't want to get in a spot where you go down to hypothetically $40 or $50 million and now you have $8 million deficits or $3 or $4 or $5 million deficits. Now you're getting at a vulnerable stage. Next major decision is, can a portion of the capital budget be aligned with the Imagine projects? And I've been working with Mike and Building and Grounds on a concept of pushing some of the projects on the current list to be spent before the Imagine projects would start, and deferring any payments till after they could start. And there's some promising numbers right now that aren't finalized, but there may be a window, a 5-year window that can be created where some of the Imagine projects can be fit right into the budget, and so projects can be addressed through that. So again, if there is that capacity, then the district could allocate $5 to $15 million worth of annual budgets towards the Imagine plan if it's so desired. And if the capacity doesn't exist, which is a decision that would be made with coordination with the Building and Grounds Department, then the Board of Education should assume that they don't have money in their annual budget for the capital projects that are tied to the Imagine plan. Next major decision that the Board of Education would consider is that should debt be issued to Imagine the plan, to address the Imagine plan. And there's basically three general options. One would be the life safety bond option, and all of these in aggregate can total $40 million. But life safety bonds would be to address only those projects that the state of Illinois have deemed must be repaired in order to comply with health and safety issues and non-compliance by code. Then there's other types of bonds that could be issued within that $40 million capacity that would also would be on your menu of items to consider to fund projects. Both the life safety bonds and the non-referendum bonds would have a tax levy attached to them. And again, the tax levy is this, so you're again, with under the theory or under the mathematical equation that $1 million in taxes equals $50, your debt service extension base is about $2.8 million. So the most you could increase your annual tax levy without going to referendum is $2.8 million. So let's round it to $3 million. Well, $3 million is about $150. So without going to referendum, the most you can increase your tax levy, because you're debt-free now, would be about $2.8 million, which is about $150 per $400,000 market value home that's listed as $400,000 on the tax bill. And then the third option is debt certificates. So debt certificates are a way to get the money up front, but pay it off over future years. So like if you bought a house, but you had the money in the bank, but you want to spread out the payments, because you don't want to commit all the funds because you've used as much as you could out of your fund balance reserves right now to be comfortable with. You borrow the money now, you pay it off a future. The negative to that is that there's interest tied to that. So you're paying back the principal and the interest. So obviously, you would use fund balances first, but if you needed to go more beyond your fund balances than you're comfortable with, then you consider that and spread out the payments over multiple years. So if you do not issue any referendum debt, then obviously there's no additional resources available for the plan. If you issue debt certificates only, the impact, there would be no impact on the future tax levies because you don't levy taxes for that. And the district would need to be able to commit up to $3 million. You'd have to be able to commit future budgets, so you may have to adjust your expenditures accordingly. And then kind of the same thing with the non-referendum debt. Life safety bonds, same thing. I have tax levy increasing between $40 and $150, depending on if you want to levy the max, or you don't have to bring the levy all the way up to $2.8 million. You could say we're going to pay $1 million of the annual levy over the next 20 years. I'm making this up, and borrow $10 million or whatever that would generate. Or you could issue a combination of debt certificates and non-referendum. You could say that we're willing to we're willing to, for example, borrow just for life safety bonds, but if we need a little bit more money, we'll borrow some debt certificates and pay it a low amount per year that can fit within the annual budget. So one of the things that I wanted to put in this is just a hypothetical example, not a recommended example, but just an example of how the pieces all fit together ultimately as you make your decision. So let's just say hypothetically, the Board of Education commits to the concept of future balanced budgets by their levy practice, weighs the state risks, and agrees that they'll bring fund balances down to 6 months worth of reserves. Then you have $63 million that you can commit towards your capital commitment. Then let's say, after discussions with Building and Grounds, that you could commit $2 million a year over a 5-year period within your capital budget for the projects. That's another $10 million that would be available for your capital commitment. And then let's assume, and these are all just hypotheticals, that the board commits to issue life safety bonds to address projects tied to health and safety risks for children. And let's just say that the state of Illinois identifies $10 million. I understand there's about $5.1 million already of approved life safety work that's on the building and grounds list already, but let's just assume that that's $10 million. And then let's say the board says, okay, we'd like to commit $100 million, we're at $83 million, so let's take $17 million and commit it to debt certificates. So you get the $17 million up front, you pay it off over future tax levies, over future budgets, you don't levy for that. The only tax in that component would be $10 million. If you dropped it down to $90 million and took off the life safety bonds, then you're doing a $90 million project without any impact to the taxpayer. But that's an example of $100 million, so you identify the capital commitment when you put it all together, how much you're willing to put towards the plan. You match it to the plan itself and what you want to address with whatever money you decide, and then you start kind of phase one of what you want to do, if you want to do it. And that's basically the process.
It was initially our hope tonight that we could start to generate discussion with the board on the concept, to start to have the kind of dialogue about potential options and what does that look like. And so that's why you got the hypothetical, to just say, so what if? Not to come up with any decision, but a what if.
But it's late, is that the
It's
unspoken?
I just didn't think, well, yes.
I just have one really quick question, you can answer in 2 seconds of that. Repayment of those bonds, 20, 30 years? What's the
20 years max.
And would we ever be able to accelerate those? Like if we decide, oh, let's do it in 5 years instead?
Yes. So in theory, you could say, we're going to borrow $5 million, pay $1 million off a year. There's interest in the top of that, but I'm simplifying.
Yep, thank you.
So the decisions that are impacting this in terms of the levy decision and as we talked about our contract negotiations, those two aspects, it's important, I think, to, your hypothetical is helpful to me in ways of thinking about how we can, with the line item aspect as well as the sequencing aspect and the timeline to be able to factor all those things in. So when that discussion would happen,
in November, we will bring the recommendation forward for the long-term facilities plan. We would ask the board to begin discussion, but we would not be asking the board to make a decision in November.
So I'm saying that's, okay, thank you.
And then I just have one macro level statement, is that kind of going back to the gentleman that spoke before I did, is that just me looking at the school district's financial condition and everything like that, remember that if you could in perpetuity keep your revenue growth and your expenditure growth the same, now that you're basically at a balanced budget, you never have to go to referendum, right? You only have to go to referendum when your expenditure growth starts exceeding your revenue growth. So you kind of have two paths, right? You have one path where you could say, we're going to pursue a CPI increase in revenue, and then let's work hard to keep our expenditure growth, if at all possible. There's things you can control, things you can't. At that same CPI rate, you never have to go to referendum again. The other option is to say that we're going to freeze the taxes now, and there's no right or wrong answer per se, and incur deficits and bring down fund balances, and that would certainly, unless you can keep expenditure growth at zero, that would certainly then accelerate when an operating referendum. I don't know. I mean, you guys, in some ways, in many ways, you guys control that point in which a referendum has to be done, as it relates to operating. But if you could keep, a district like yours that's at balanced budget. Sometimes I go into districts and they're starting with a $3 or $4 million deficit, and they're not in that spot. But if you're essentially at a balanced budget, so going forward, your revenue and expenditure growth, that relationship is going to drive the long-term future of your district.
That's helpful. Great.
It'd be wonderful if we could hold to a balanced budget. However, CPI is not an employment index.
Right, and.
Okay, and employment costs typically and historically rise in excess of CPI.
Yeah, but I would also say that there oftentimes is I mean, first of all, the supply and demand's changed. There's not a lot of the supply is less than the demand, and so the cost of labor is going up generally in terms of teachers. Down south, where they don't have competitive salary schedules, they can't find teaching positions, teachers to fill their positions. But again, if you could manage that growth with the fact that there'll be savings from retirements and things like that, and you know, I don't know, I mean, just kind of dive into the whole plan. I
mean, we're diving.
I know you are. I mean, Fred, it's a huge challenge for sure. I'm just saying hypothetically, if you could make that, if that model could work, then every year, you know, you bring your fund balances down to whatever month's reserves, it stays at that level.
Yeah, but Rob, I think the challenge to balance our salary increases to CPI would be not where we are today, and be a huge challenge.
And that's the part I don't know. I mean, I know that, I know generally speaking, with the new 3% cap, a lot of districts are focusing on that.
Right, and with all future growth, if we get new students, or all future increases have to be absorbed by us now, because the state does not provide any support at all.
Including much of your special ed now. You used to be reimbursed more for special ed, now it's part of your base funding.
Right.
So you're not getting additional money if you're special ed.
On top of special ed.
Right.
That's on top of, you know, we've been spending $5 million a year on our building, which we know to be inadequate.
Right.
So it's
very
challenging.
Right. So then the same kind of the same metric holds in that if you have if you can't get, let's just say inflation, it's trending a little bit higher than 2 right now, but let's just say it's 2, and you can't keep it at 2, and it ends up being 3 or 4. Now that there's even a further gap, right? It's either 0 revenue and 4% expenditures, or 2% revenues. So it's still, either way, you know, the smaller the gap, you know, even if you can't keep the gap completely closed, the smaller the gap, the longer you can go out without.
Understood. I mean, it's.
But those are both your points are very well taken. It's a huge challenge.
Are there any, you know, you've kind of covered the different options of sources of capital, but I'm just, you know, grant or any other.
Well,
are there any other trees to be shaken that in today's climate? I don't.
I mean, I actually had lunch 2 weeks ago with one of the ranking members of the House. There's supposedly some $1 billion type of capital plan that they want to integrate. I don't know if it's going to schools. I don't know where the heck the money's coming from. You know, they keep pumping out money and I don't know where it's coming from. But there is a major capital plan that's being considered down in Springfield to fund roads and fund buildings. I don't know if it's for schools, and I don't know if my guess would be that they, you know, at least if they're following the way they do the evidence-based funding model, that you guys would be lined up last in line. But that's something that's being considered. I don't know how it plays out with this area.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, it's half time.
Okay, yes, we're almost, it's action. Oh, it's an action item.
Oh. Are we, I move to approve the Board of Education goals for the 2018-19 school year as presented, and ask for a second.
Second.
Questions, comments? Okay.
Okay, that's what Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Ms. Cassell,
Yes.
Mr. Kowski,
Yes, I'm trying to give Craig time. Wait,
I didn't look over that way.
Dr. Moore? Yes.
Filibuster.
Yeah,
Filibuster.
that's good.
Craig? He said yes.
So where is he?
He took a brief break, I'm sure.
He had a bio.
Because we,
Wants a vote?
we're good.
It just was out of the room.
Yeah.
I know. All right.
Can you vote afterwards?
So, if there are no further, items,
He's coming, he's coming.
Okay, let's talk about the,
if there are no further, items.
yeah, call his name.
Mr. Isley? Say yes.
Say yes.
Yes.
What am I saying yes
The board goes.
Four goals.
Yes.
Yay.
Motion carried.
Okay, so I move to, adjourn.
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
No.
Thank you, everyone. Hurry and get home before tomorrow.